We are Newsroom. Hello, welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, Evan Hansen. The show is always live, broadcast from our studios right here in Auckland Park between 9 and 12 every weekday morning. We're also live on our streaming facility on YouTube. You can watch us back on demand even later in the day now. The AU Summit is on. Today's question deals directly with that in light of what's been going on in places like Burundi and so forth. Do you think peace and prosperity is possible for the AU and for the African continent? That's a question. We'd love you to interact with us at SABC Newsroom. But let's go to Elvis now for our first news update.
Thank you, Evan. Let's take it right from the top. The Reserve Bank is expected to announce another interest rate hike this afternoon following the first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. President Jacob Zuma says the controversial pension tax laws will only be reviewed after 2 years as labour unions threaten to strike over the issue. And the situation remains tense at Cape St. Francis in the Eastern Cape as sporadic veld fires continue to flare up. Now, those are all your headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Elvis. Thank you very much. You know, it's all about tennis as we get to the business end of the Australian Open, and that's what it's all about this morning. Good morning to you. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
She does it in style.
Serena Williams destroys Polish fourth seed Agnieszka Radwanska 6-love, 6-4 to book a spot in the Australian Open final, where she'll meet German Angelique Kerber.
Dupree for the scoreline!
Springbok great and captain at the last World Cup, Fourie du Preez may be making a quiet exit from all rugby as he's currently out of contract with both Saru and his Japanese club Suntory. And this, as the Russian Prosecutor General's office is ready to clean up corruption in the country's athletics as it reviews Wada's report. That's pretty much what we've got for you in the sport. Be sure to stick around for that about 10:20 or so. Back to you, Elvis.
Thank you, Kendall. That's all coming up a little bit later. Right now, top story this hour. The Reserve Bank is expected to announce another rate hike this afternoon, following its first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. The statement is expected to paint a bleak picture about the local economic outlook. Economists say that the bank is likely to make further large downward adjustments to its GDP growth estimates. The committee is set to reflect on the worsening inflation outlook, driven largely by drought, a weaker rand, and higher electricity tariffs. Most economists expect the bank to raise policy rates by 50 basis points. The presidency says the newly signed pension tax laws will go ahead with a review only in 2 years' time. This comes after outrage from private and public labour unions. The tax laws limit lump sum payments to workers to just a third and forces them to convert the rest into annuities assessed or accessed via a monthly allowance. President Jacob Zuma says that complaints by unions that there was never extensive consultation on the tax administration laws are incorrect and misleading. He says there was a total of 40 meetings with NEDLAC and labour unions between 2012 and last year. He says there was also a public comment period, and those comments were considered when the law was finalised. Zuma adds that Parliament required that the law, which comes into play on March the 1st, be reviewed in 2 years. Now, this is despite Labour Federation COSATU and Metal Workers Union NUMSA threatening massive strike action if the laws are not repealed. The African National Congress says it is determined to protect the country from experiencing any further economic downgrade. The ruling party expressed confidence in South Africa's global competitiveness after rising from 56 to 49. Its three-day NEC Lekgotla ended in Tshwane last night. The summit of the ANC's decision-making body dealt with urgent priorities facing the government. The topical issue of racism was also put on the agenda. However, the Lekgotla mainly focused on economic issues. It issued a stern warning to the United States on the AGOA treaty that South Africa will not be dictated to by Washington on matters unrelated to trade relations. The ANC recommitted itself to invest more in infrastructure and social investment. On the upcoming local government elections, the party says it is confident that it will do well. It aims to win back the city of Cape Town from the Democratic Alliance and retain all other metros. At least 3 houses have been damaged and a number of fishermen boats completely destroyed in yet another flare-up of bushfires in the Eastern Cape resort town of Cape St. Francis. Since the weekend, fire breakouts have had community members in a panic.
From firefighters to sea rescue teams and volunteers, all have been battling with sporadic fire outbreaks since the weekend. Last night, the raging fire came very close to the township area and the airfields. At least 3 houses have been damaged and a number of fishermen boats completely destroyed. As a safety measure, the elderly and families with young children were evacuated. Some residents chose to safeguard their homes and monitor the situation. The community has also taken to social media asking for donations to keep firefighters fueled up with food. They also did some fundraising to bring in a second privately owned helicopter to keep the blazes under control. 3 teams of 20 have been dispatched throughout the area to monitor the situation throughout the night. Concerns remain over strong winds, which could flare up the fires again.
We've put out all blazes, all flares, so we hope that there will be no flares coming up. But with the westerly wind that is coming up in the early mornings of tomorrow morning, starting on very slow pace and running up until 45 degrees or 45 speed limit, so we've put a plan in place.
Police are still investigating the cause of the fire. Reporting SABC News, Cape St. Francis.
In news abroad, the World Health Organization will hold a special session later today on the Zika virus. The UN agency is under pressure for quick action against the infection linked to thousands of birth defects in Brazil that is spreading through Latin America and the Caribbean. Researchers in the United States says swift decisions are needed as the virus has an explosive pandemic potential.
Health officials in New York State say 4 people returning from travel abroad have tested positive for the Zika virus. That's the mosquito-borne virus linked to tragic birth defects among thousands of newborns in Latin America. The spike there of babies born with microcephaly is sparking a health scare among Americans who worry about the spread of the virus to the States. There's been no report of Zika transmission in the continental U.S., but a woman who fell ill with the virus in Brazil later gave birth to a brain-damaged baby in Hawaii. Now, some scientists plan to take the fight to the kind of mosquito that uniquely carries this virus. UK-based Oxitec hopes to deploy a genetically modified strain of the male mosquito to mate with its wild female counterpart. The company says trials showed the modified mosquito slash the number of wild larvae by 80%. Still, with no cure for microcephaly, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention is warning pregnant women to avoid travel to certain countries affected by the virus. U.S. researchers are also urging the World Health Organization to heed the lesson of the Ebola epidemic last year and to act quickly against the outbreak.
Now, back here at home, at least 5 people have been diagnosed with typhoid fever in Gauteng in the past month. 1 person has died after being diagnosed with the disease. The cases were reportedly from Hillbrow, Yeoville and Edenvale. However, the Gauteng Health Department said it had activated its outbreak response team to trace and manage the cases. Zimbabwe is also on high alert following a number of reported cases. Meanwhile, in the mosquito-borne Zika virus, which we just heard about, which is expected to, of causing brain damage to babies in Brazil, is likely to spread across the Americas. And we'll chat to our guest about that. Is now joining in the studio as the Deputy Director of the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, Professor Lucille Bloomberg. Professor, very good morning to you and welcome.
Thank you.
First and foremostly, here at home, the typhoid fever, is it under control?
So there is no outbreak. There was an alert because of the 4 cases over a relatively short time. But we have typhoid throughout the year with seasonal increase. And there's been no link between the cases to a common source, water or food. which would be more concerning about an outbreak.
What constitutes an outbreak or a crisis, and how many cases need to be reported in order for it to be considered an outbreak?
I don't think we should look at the numbers game. We should look at a common link to a water source or a food source. And that is not the case in these. So these are what we would call sporadic cases, not unusual, particularly at this time of the year.
Is the disease contagious?
So it is infectious. It's found in the feces of infected persons, and it can be transmitted through contaminated food and water. So personal hygiene after toilet, before preparing food, is particularly important. And the use of informal water sources, where somebody could have used it for a toilet, would be an issue. But that is not the case generally in Gauteng. Our water is really very good quality.
Now, the cases were reported in Gauteng, and as you say, our water sources are fairly up to speed with that. So what can people do to prevent them from getting any typhoid?
So there are very few cases, and we do see them all the time. So it's really about good hygiene. Washing hands after toilet, preparing food well, cooking it well, not using informal water sources if that's only available, and obviously boiling the water. And that applies not only to typhoid, but other germs, bacteria, viruses that are transmitted in that way.
So it's in personal hygiene, it's also about preparation of food, making sure that the food is washed before you...
But animals are not a source. Humans are actually the source of typhoid.
Now, in a number of cases, has also been reported in Zimbabwe, we believe. Are there health checks taking place across our borders in our neighbouring countries?
So that's not possible to do. You can be infected, you could be incubating it, you could have no symptoms. Zimbabwe have had an increase since 2011, 2012, where they had an outbreak. But typhoid is well documented throughout the region, including South Africa.
And it's
not something that you can check at a border.
And it is controllable?
It's treatable. Antibiotics are very effective in treatment. I think what's important is that anyone presenting with a high fever, headache, abdominal pain, cold shivers, hot sweats, need to think about typhoid as a possible cause. But importantly, at this time of the year, travellers returning from malaria areas have a much greater risk. And the symptoms are very much the same. And it's, malaria is treatable, but it's rapidly progressive if it's missed.
When you do observe these symptoms, what do you do as a patient?
I think anybody with a high fever should seek medical care. It could be one of many infections. Malaria now, number one, because of travel, because of the season, typhoid as part of the consideration for alternatives.
We had in our package earlier in the program about the Zika virus in America. There's an outbreak of that disease called Zika. Can you explain to us exactly what it is? We know it's a mosquito-borne disease.
So it actually originated in the Zika forest in Uganda in 1947, was identified in rhesus monkeys. We've not had outbreaks in Africa. And there have been cases now and again, probably as low down as Uganda. But in the last 2-3 years, it has spread to the Pacific Islands, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. There have been massive outbreaks. It's spread by a particular mosquito. It's mostly causing mild illness in people affected. But there's this concern about pregnant women who contracted it and the risk of microcephaly and neurological development problems in their newborns. That's the big concern.
So children then will be born with defects, is that
so
what you're saying?
Not all. I think the link has been made. There are investigations. The causality, that it's definitely due to Zika, I think we still need to find out about. But pregnant women should not travel to places like Brazil at the moment.
Now, what kind of health checks are taking place at airports for this kind of disease, or is there such a thing?
There are checks for fever at our airports, mainly related to the Ebola outbreak. Many people will have no symptoms. It's not infectious person to person. You need that mosquito in between. I think South Africa really doesn't have a risk of Zika. I think in returning travellers, there is a list of infectious diseases, malaria, Zika, dengue, that one would consider. And it's important to know about them. We can test.
Professor, as always, thank you so much for joining us here in studio. That was Professor Lucille Bloomberg. She is the Deputy Director of the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. Right now, it's over to Evan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alvis. A very good morning to you at home. If you've just joined us now, I can tell you the African Union have announced plans for a 5,000-strong force to help stabilize the politically troubled Burundi. However, Burundi is reportedly considering such a force an invasion. AU leaders will use the 26th African Union Summit to push President Pierre Nkurunziza to accept peacekeeping troops at the summit to avoid the country sliding back into civil war. Now, to discuss this a little bit, we are joined by African analyst Mr. Isaac Comer this morning. Very good morning to you, Isaac. Thanks for joining us once again.
Morning to you.
The summit, it almost seems as if there's a little bit of external pressure, especially from countries like America and the European Union, on this summit specifically to firstly deal with the Burundian crisis. What do you make of this decision to send troops by the AU into Burundi?
Well, that's an AU decision, as you said, but then it has got to get the authorization from the Security Council, and that's why the Security Council is being involved. Well, the AU, as far as some people are concerned, and I'm also support them, saying that they went too fast in saying they're going to send 5,000 troops, instead of actually engaging with the Burundian government and see how they're going to send the troops. Will the troops be there as peacekeepers, or will they be there as observers or peace enforcers? Yeah. So now there's been that impasse. Yeah. And again, this problem is this, that the AU Security Council itself is divided on that. The question, the people supporting the sending of troops is basically the United States, the Western countries. But then you've got countries like Russia, Venezuela, basically third world countries, I think even Angola. They say that basically sending troops, it's an arbitrary thing and it actually infringes on the country's sovereignty. And there are other technical issues involved. Yeah. So what they've come to do now is this, that they've actually tried to work towards sending troops as observers. And I think that's what is going to be discussed now.
The Arusha Accords, of which Burundi is a signatory with the AU, it gives the AU that right to send in troops if they deem it necessary. Surely Burundi should budge on this.
I don't think so. The Arusha Accord never dealt with it was not an accord between the AU and Burundi. It was an accord amongst the Burundians themselves. Yeah, and basically having a clause that the AU has got a right to send in troops, it's not there. And I think that will be a travesty of people's sovereignty.
What about the visit of diplomats to the UN Security Council last week? The rhetoric that came out a little bit from Pierre Nkurunziza was not conciliatory, if you could say that.
Well, Pierre Nkurunziza, that was on Friday. Pierre Nkurunziza actually sort of stuck to his guns, saying that, first of all, he said that there's no possibility of there being genocide, simply because the armed forces of the country, they are made up of 50-50 Hutu, Tutsi, yeah? And you find that although the Tutsi make up only 15% of the population, they've got 50% representation in the army at all levels, from the commanders right up to the fighting men. So the question that the country would slide into genocide driven by the security forces is out of the question, yeah? Secondly, Nkurunziza said that the Burundian, his government, is prepared to work with the Security Council, or AU, or any outside, neutral outside forces to come and verify, what is happening in Burundi. So basically, although that he was actually sort of closing the door to a peacekeeping force of 5,000, he was opening another door, saying that you can bring in your observers. Yeah. And I think that's where it's been going to be discussed at the AU summit.
The summit, of course, is going on right now. What do you think are going to be the key points of discussion there? Yes, it would have to be Burundi, of course, and what do you think the resolutions would be with regards to that? But there are also issues in South Sudan, the DRC, maybe?
Oh, yes. In fact, the top of the agenda is Burundi. Yeah, everybody's concerned about Burundi because if that country breaks down, the thing will overflow to the DRC.
The entire Great Lakes region would be destabilized.
Yes, yeah. But again, I think one thing which is going to come out, I mean, the spotlight is going to be put on Burundi and also on Rwanda for actually aiding and abating rebels, Burundian rebels. I think that will come up. But then again, the most important thing about the AU summit this time, they're talking about silencing the guns. That is the theme. There is a talk that the guns have got to be silenced by 2020. And they're looking at ways, means on how to silence those guns, be they in the Great Lakes, be they against the terrorists like Al-Shabaab, against Boko Haram, and against, and that also brings in the question of governance, not only governance, democracy, real democracy. Democracy should be put in place and it should work. It should not be enforced.
Silencing the guns, very, very important on the continent. Isaac, thanks for joining us today, giving us his insights. He's an analyst and expert on African affairs. Of course, silencing the guns, that's what we want you to answer on our question of the day. Is it possible? Is peace possible through the African Union, throughout the entire continent? Can we silence the guns on the continent? That's the question we want you to answer now. The United Nations Secretary General and senior Security Council diplomats, they've expressed high expectation of African heads of state when they tackle the question of Burundi during the summit in Addis Ababa this weekend. Here are some of the comments that we see on social media. Matthew Kay talks about Africa only 4 years away from its target to silence the guns. Dlamini Zuma at the AU summit, says Matthew Kay. Our very own Vuyomvoko says Hutu Tutsi killings in Burundi, never. Burundi Foreign Affairs Minister Nyamitwe tells SABC News. That's the same thing that Isaac Como told us this morning. Then Karine Duplessis says AC Weil is mentioning that the AU wants to push for continental free trade areas by 2017. We must trade amongst ourselves in Africa. AU summit. Yes, it's only common sense, isn't it? Sam talks about, are you in Addis for the AU summit? Would you be surprised if the AU handed Mugabe a second term as chair? Interesting one there from Sam. And this one from Solomon. AU ministers retreat decided elaboration of protocol on free movement of people to be adopted in January of 2018. Yes, we have to set ourselves free on the continent. So those are some of your views at SABC Newsroom, is where you can interact with us. Let's take a look now at the front pages from around the globe. In Europe, the Times reports that Britain is to provide sanctuary to unaccompanied refugee children from the conflict in Syria under plans to be announced by the government today. Then, in Iran, the Tehran Times says Iran signed 3 oil contracts with Russia, Spain and Italy to further explore and study its oil fields based on their geological and geophysical features. Then, in the United Kingdom, the Independent reports that David Cameron has refused to launch an inquiry into British arms sales to Saudi Arabia, saying arms exports are carefully controlled. Now, let's take a quick look at what's in the courts here in South Africa today. In Bloemfontein, an ANC ward councillor in Bultfontein in the Free State is expected to appear in the local magistrate's court. She is accused of assaulting and injuring a 14-year-old girl in August of last year and faces a charge of grievous bodily harm. Then in Nelspruit, 2 police constables and a woman who were arrested for being in possession of dacha are expected to appear in the local magistrate's court. The on-duty policemen were allegedly transporting the dacha to the woman, their client alleged to be in the city centre. That's what's around the courts in South Africa today. Time for us to take a short break. We'll be back right after this.
Africa's tech scene is constantly coming up with innovative ways to answer some of the continent's problems.
We source content from social media, from our mobile apps, from our website.
And as people move from phone calls to data, companies have to switch what they offer.
People expect to get higher speeds, better quality broadband for less.
On Network, we have information on Africa's technology and social media scene. That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 9 p.m. Central African Time, only on SABC News.
Welcome back. Now remember that we're asking you a very important question today. In light of the AU summit that's happening in Addis this week, we're asking you, in light of that summit, is peace in Africa really a possibility? We'd like you to answer that question. You can send us your views on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. You can also do so on our Facebook page. But remember in 2013, President Pierre Nkurunziza in Burundi approved a new media law which critics condemned as an attack on press freedom. The law forbids reporting on matters that could undermine national security, public order, or the economy. Under the current unstable political climate in Burundi, news coverage and reporting in the country is likely to be disturbed. Now, for more on media coverage and covering the crisis in Burundi as well as Africa, we're joined in studio by Wellington Radu from Media Monitoring Africa. Wellington, once again, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning, Elvis, and thank you for having me again.
Now, first and foremostly, let's take a look at Burundi as a country and the media coverage that the country has received. Do you think that it has received adequate media coverage, not just continentally, but internationally as well?
I think when you look at issues around adequacy, you're talking about two things essentially, in terms of one, quality, and the other one is the quantity of the coverage. If you look at the quantity, for instance, of the coverage, it's a very difficult thing to determine. However, if you look at the quality of it, then it's something that you can drill down and really look into. If you look at the quality of the coverage in Burundi, it's very depressing, particularly because if you look at our own local media and how they cover it, it's reduced to 5 lines, right? Which essentially says, look, this is a number of people have been killed, people are running all over the place, and this is what's happening in Burundi. You're not given the context as to what's really happening. Is it a tribal issue? Is it about the third term that the president announced that he wanted to have? Or is it about other things? What are the issues that are being done to solve that conflict? And those are some of the things that are missing from this. And what that does is that it feeds into the very same thing that international media does when they cover these things. Often they present Africa as this dark continent where conflict is inevitable, it's tribal, and people are barbaric. And this is a problem that we're also feeding as local media.
Now, talking about that, because we would, on this particular program, we tend to look at Africa in a different perspective, a more positive, because there's so much positives that is not being highlighted on the continent. Yep. Isaac Kormos mentioned it a couple of times before, that the issue in Burundi is not necessarily a countrywide issue. It's pockets of protest, it's pockets of people happening there. Well, maybe that's his own view, but the point is, there is pockets of excellence in the country that is not being highlighted. But as Africa, and how does the Burundian crisis now influence the outlook for Africa from a media perspective?
Well, you're spot on. So the issues that are coming out of the media coverage of Burundi is that, one, you have the presidency or the president and the government saying there is no crisis, right? And then you have other activists saying there is a crisis. Who do you believe? And this is, I think, the role that media has to play in articulating those issues, in getting to the bottom of those issues. I know, aside from the fact that there isn't resources, be it time or otherwise, yes, that's fine. But if we are to move beyond presenting Africa as this dark continent, we have to invest in our own media so that we can cover those issues in a holistic manner and we tell our own stories. And I must say, though, that what we are seeing in the last few years is this whole discourse around the decolonization of the academy, for instance. So we're having all these ideas about Africa and portraying Africa in a positive light and not looking at Europe or looking at Africa from the eyes of Europe or a Eurocentric perspective. And I think this is something that's really good, and we will have to see where this takes us.
Which media, in your view, has been more prominent to look at Burundi and the Great Lakes as more prominent?
That's an interesting question, because prominence would assume that it's either they're covering so much, but the question is how much of that is really good quality. That's what's important. And I think what we tend to see is that international media cover these things more than we do. But when they do, they almost push this white supremacy idea or viewpoint about Africa, which doesn't give us that much of a context. And when we get pockets, and I mean there are very few pockets of excellence within African media that tries to unpack some of these things. You know the AU summit, we have been talking about it earlier, right? And we know what's going to happen is that there isn't anything going to be dramatic out of it to report, right? But it's important for local media or African media to follow the proceedings and to hold these heads of states to accountable for the decisions that they make, because often what lacks is that they pronounce all those things at the AU summit and media doesn't interrogate them and say, but hey, you resolved that you're going to do A, B, C, and D, but where are we?
So now there's a new media law in Burundi, and we also believe that the Burundian media has been experiencing cyber attacks. You want to tell us more about that?
It's also interesting that you're asking me that question, because we would assume that media should be telling us this, which again proves the point, which is to say it's our role, it's the media's role to unpack these things and tell us, but you will get one story about it.
Yes.
And beyond that, nothing. I mean, let me give you an example. Yesterday, there was a story about Eritrea, right, which appeared in the media where it was alleged that the government had said men should marry more than one wife, right? But the facts were not verified in that story. And then the question is, why do you report it? Why am I raising this? I'm raising this because it's important that when we do cover Burundi in this instance, we got to verify facts, because often in conflict regions, it's very difficult to go in and to cover stories. But it's important also to have context within and to unpack all the issues so that at least we have an idea as to what is happening on our continent.
Spotlight on Africa. Wellington Radu, thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Thank you for having
Wellington
me.
Radu is from Media Monitoring Africa, and need to change that narrative. But Yeben, you've got more comments for us.
Yeah, very interesting interview that, of course, we'll continue with our theme on the African Union Summit and Burundi a little bit later in the show. But right now, let's go to social media. The Trana University of Technology Student Representative Council, they say police acted within their rights when they used tear gas to disperse striking workers there yesterday. It's caused a lot of unhappiness. Let's have a look what people have been saying on SAR. Mukudi Kennedy says students dropping stones have protested at TET as police had to come in and calm the situation. Wow, outsourcing must fall. Lucy says, Occupy TET, our protests continue and we will intensify. Fight fire with fire. That doesn't sound too good, does it? Gaddafi says, waste of time and money. TOT strike, outsourcing must fall. Then Samkelo says, workers of outsourcing must fall were conscientious by students about exploitation. Now students who are partial fight them. Oh, that is a dangerous divide. And yes, one could see the must-fall movements have been at loggerheads at some point of time with each other. Interesting how things will develop from next week onwards when the university, when classes get back underway on most campuses around the country here in South Africa. We'll let you know how that one develops. Anyhow, let's take a look at our Facebook page quickly. Now, Social Development Minister Barabili Dlamini will later today engage various stakeholders in East London in an attempt to come up with early childhood development programs that will be responsive to the needs of children. Tech giant Samsung Electronics warned of possible weaker earnings this year due to softer sales of gadgets such as smartphones, a trend that is also hurting rival Apple and major chip makers. Then debate rages on about the new tax laws coming into effect on March the 1st, following the announcement that they will be reviewed now after 2 years only. Lots of unhappiness within the trade union federations here in South Africa. All of those stories and more on our Facebook page. Type Newsroom in the Facebook in the search bar on Facebook. Will pop up. Like our page, or go to our website sabc.co.za if you want news /it. Time for us to take a break. We'll be back shortly.
SABC News. We report, contextualize and present news and current affairs honestly, fairly and fully. We consider it a duty to provide consistent, relevant, useful and top quality information and analysis. Our mission is to provide credible, accurate and interesting news programming, bringing news into everyone's homes in everyone's languages. Thank you, South Africa, for relying on SABC News for quality news output and for making us your #1 source of information. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon only on the SABC News channel.
Welcome back. Now, the United States is looking to the African Union Summit and what progress heads of state make this coming weekend in pushing President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar back to the implementation of the floundering peace agreement. The UN Secretary General and senior Security Council diplomats have also expressed high expectations of African heads of state when they tackle the question of Burundi during this summit in Addis Ababa this weekend. Now, for more on the summit and the various flashpoints, we are joined in studio by Dr. Alfredo Hengari from the South African Institute of International Affairs. Dr. Hengari, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me to your show.
It seems as if the world is looking at this AU summit with somewhat different eyes. We hear pronouncements from the UN, now from the United States. What is your expectation of the summit, and what do you make of the comments we see?
Well, I think it should be a summit where a lot is to happen, especially in light of some of the challenges facing Africa as a whole, and also specific African countries, and notably Burundi, as well as South Sudan, where there are serious political challenges. Political stalemate in South Sudan has stunted economic growth. Burundi has been in crisis since last April, when President Pierre Nkurunziza pushed for a third term, and he succeeded in a third term. So I think the summit should come up with a clear roadmap that would push first President Pierre Nkurunziza to accept some form of political transitional arrangement that will allow for peace and stability to return to that country. Similarly, for South Sudan, it's important that this summit comes out with some very concrete plans around these two crises.
South Sudan is an interesting one. Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. Do you think that at this summit, heads of state can come together and pressurize them back to implementing the peace plans in that country?
Well, I think it is certainly an important objective for summit to achieve. But it's also important to emphasize here that there's already a regional mediation taking place, and that process will have to be channeled through the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. So it's the summit is a high-level type of lobbying mechanism to push this country, these two actors, Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, to agree to some form of agreement around the peace process in South Sudan. But I don't think that one should be too optimistic in terms of what a summit of that nature can achieve.
Summits like these, they always tend to focus on security, especially with the challenges that the continent has. Insurgency must be one of those things top of the agenda. Do you think there'll be some decisions made with regards to dealing with insurgency on the continent at the summit?
Well, I think this is an ordinary summit of the African Union. It's not an extraordinary summit that has been called to deal with some of the specific issues that you have raised.
Yeah.
It's important to highlight here that the theme of this summit, especially for the year 2016, is it's the year of human rights and specifically the rights of women. So that's the broader theme of 2016. So countries will be touching on those issues in a very routine fashion. And some of these issues are certainly likely to emerge, but it's not really the objective of the summit to come up with specific solutions to some of these issues.
I think the world has different expectations. The world has somewhat different expectations from this summit, especially, I think, Burundi as well, the situation escalating in that country. What do you think can happen over the weekend that might be a game changer with regards to the situation on the ground in Burundi?
Well, I'm not too sure whether we are likely to see a game changer because a few days ago, a delegation of the United Nations Security Council visited Burundi, and the objective was to push Pierre Nkurunziza to accept a peace plan for the country that would include an intervening force from the African Union or through the United Nations. And he categorically refused to the demands of the Security Council. So it begs the question as to what leverage now the African Union might have in terms of pushing into some form of agreement that would involve peacekeepers in the country. Because from where he stands, he sees an intervening force as a violation of the sovereignty of Burundi, and it's important that he accepts an intervening force. For it to have legitimacy.
The AU have announced 5,000 troops are being sent there, not as an intervening force, but as a peacekeeping force, is what they call it. Do you see this as part of a move to fight for its own legitimacy on the African continent, to show that it has some clout on the ground on the continent?
Yes, it's important for the AU to take leadership because for a while now, the Burundi file was being dealt with by the United Security Council. Really, France was pushing for some form of resolution of the conflict. So I think the AU, as an institution, as a body that has been pushing for African solutions to African problems, should certainly take a leading role in resolving the crisis in Burundi.
Thank you for joining us. That's Dr. Alfredo Ngari from the South African Institute of International Affairs. It doesn't sound very hopeful that the AU is going to be able to change the game this weekend, but small steps. First one, of course, is peacekeeping troops on the ground in Burundi, and that is happening. Let's get a situation let's have a look now at the economic aspects of the summit. Others, we'll look at it.
Yes, Evan, the 26th session of the AU Summit formally starts on Saturday, and it will end on Sunday at the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Now, this is a meeting of the African Union Assembly that's attended by over 50 African leaders and some foreign dignitaries invited by the chairperson of the AU Commission. As Evan indicated, the issue of peace and security in Africa is expected to dominate the summit, but this year's theme focuses specifically on women's rights. But there are major issues, such as alternative funding for the African Union, illicit outflows from the continent, migration and the African Agenda 2063. Now, to talk to us about these issues, we're joined by Dr. Peter Karungu, economist.
Thank you, and thank you.
Now, do you think that we could see anything new coming out of the AU Summit this year?
Well, of course, there must be a new agenda, not much different than what we've been seeing all along. I think to start with, we have to admit that the global changes are also reflective in the continent. The changes, particularly in the upcoming, energetic, power-driven, questionable youth are making everybody realize the game has to change a little bit. That notwithstanding, you have to understand the constraints of the AU, one of which the budgetary constraint. I was reading yesterday, their budget for 2014 was $296 million. They could barely get 54% of the budget to run the initiatives. That is a shock. The budget last year was $496 million. Anything I'm quoting is less than 10% of Johannesburg budget, the city of Johannesburg. And even then, they can't raise the money. So maybe we put too much into what economists would call a political club rather than a political delivery system.
But let's talk about funding. There was always suggestions that the AU should look at their own internal funding, especially from the members and not from external partners, because that would obviously put some influence into the African Union. What's your take on that?
Well, there is a saying that says, with respect, that when you are always begging, options are limited in your deliberations.
Yes.
So there has been too much dependent on what they call development partners, social partners, multilateral institutions. If African continent cannot raise a budget, literally to run what we call their driving force of one focus of what we call the Africa should be. If they cannot raise $500 million a year as a continent to run that, it's very scary. That's number one. Number two, you can't also literally have an objective if you don't have the funding. And I think that's where the trouble is with the new chairperson of the AU, because she's committed to see change. But I think she may be disappointed as much as we are. I may be wrong.
Now, she wants to see that change, but her term ends at the end of June. What do you think that is going to do to the AU and, of course, South Africa's influence on the AU as a body?
I must admit it's the first time we had a lady as the chairperson of the AU. She has the blueprint we have read are massive, and they are very positive. Remember, it's a club, I said earlier, it's heads of state who are predominantly male-dominated. It's a club of people, many of them have been to leadership for 20 years, 30 years. They're not going to change overnight. But if I read what we read and what we hear she's advocating, we are seeing something that I would argue in the next 10 years should have made a footprint in the discourse the AU will be heading forward. Whether she gets the second term or not, at least we are seeing a change that we've been waiting for a little bit longer.
Let's go back to the funding model. Do you think perhaps that the members are not perhaps contributing enough or should contribute enough to the fund to make the AU work and stand alone as an independent body, not being influenced by anybody else? And what about Africa's major outflows? There's illicit outflows out of this continent that can probably fund the AU as well as every other initiative that we have on the continent.
Agreed. First, I think there are so many members who don't pay their dues. One thing people don't, you default to pay if you don't value what you are paying for. Maybe for far too long, the AU has not delivered commensurate with the expectation of the member state. I'm not very sure on that one. The second aspect is to look at these countries are very poor. You don't have countries with enough money. Except in the last 20 years, we have seen, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, economies growing at 11%. They grew, literally quadrupled this per capita income between 2003 and 2013. So we are seeing a lot of changes in the continent that we thought could also be matching the funding for the AU. However, by the reading I had yesterday, they're saying 60% of the budget for the AU will be coming from South Africa, Nigeria, Libya, Angola, and Egypt. I think they're and Algeria, 6 countries. Those countries are committed to put in 60%, which is okay. But then the other members will be able to come up with the 40%. We are saying 48 member states will be coming with 40% of a budget across the board, less than $500 million. So really, it's a question of either the commitment. But the other issue is the outflows. There is a show I read the other day. There is a lady she's Sierra Leonean, born in Germany. I don't remember her name. And each one of us ought to see that show. She says, I quote, I come from the richest countries on earth, Sierra Leone. She listed the resources of Sierra Leone that even, and she was talking this in Berlin in Germany. And anybody who saw that presentation says Africa, not only is it rich, it is literally leading for the growth of Europe. Because without Africa, Europe will not be where it is. Remember, Chirac, the former prime minister of France, said, I quote, that it's the high time France realizes without Africa, there could be also a third world. These facts are being said by people who are also prominently knowledgeable of how long the exploitation has been. However, what is it happening? These outflow are done by you and I. Primarily, the heads of state who are studying there, 54 of them, if you ask them where is your money seated, they'll tell you probably 80% of their wealth is seated in Europe. Thanks to President Obama, who is saying the game has to change. And some of them, the money is particularly in London. We are fighting that. Why is it happening? The youth, social media, is the greatest threat to what we are seeing. The old club of leadership will have to change.
Doctor, as usual, thank you so much for your insights. The game plan has to change, so says Dr. Karungu. He's, of course, an economist and lecturer at WITS, chatting to us about the African Union Summit and what will come out of that. We have the riches, we have the resources, it's all here. We got to make it happen. But right now, a man is going to make it happen for you to look at the weather forecast. Tsitsi Munare.
Welcome from the weather desk. So let's take a look at the African continent and see, in terms of the weather, what you should expect for today. Just around clear skies are expected for the southwestern parts, going over the western interior and over the central parts of the country, but with a bit of showers now starting in over the eastern side. And it will be moving all the way towards the northern parts, into some parts of Mozambique, as well as over Madagascar. Do expect the rain. And then tomorrow, again, those showers will spread all the way towards the northern part, into Harare, Beira, going out towards the western side over Windhoek. Expect those rainy conditions into Madagascar as well. Your temperatures are expected to be quite hot. For some places, do expect possibilities of severe thunderstorms right over the central part of the Eastern Cape, as well as over KwaZulu-Natal, particularly over the southern part of KwaZulu-Natal. Gaborone will be hot at 36 degrees, and then slightly cooler conditions are expected for Cape Town at a maximum of 25. It gets hot as you move towards the northwestern parts. Sunny skies for both Windhoek, Walvis Bay, Swakopmund, as well as all the way towards the northern part of Namibia. Over Central Africa, we're seeing rainy conditions again from the west, spreading right across the central part and along the eastern side. And the eastern regions, it goes up north towards Kenya in Nairobi. Do expect Addis Ababa also to have a bit of rain. And the capital of Ethiopia will also be experiencing some cooler conditions into the lower 20s for today and possibly tomorrow as well. And you'll see temperatures along the Kigali region going all the way towards the DRC into Kinshasa. Temperatures are slightly increasing from 22 to about 29 degrees. So it is getting quite hot. Showers are expected from Kinshasa to Brazzaville, and a little bit of rainfall towards Libreville, and then some sunny skies returning towards Juba with a maximum of those lower 30s, upper 20s to lower 30s. No chance of rainfall is expected whatsoever along the central parts, covering most parts of the Sahara Desert. And as you move towards, I expected up and towards Libya, some parts of Algeria, as well as over Egypt. Along Cairo, do expect hot weather for today, and temperatures for this winter period are expected to be into the lower 20s. Could be just around 21 as your afternoon temperatures. Benghazi is still very cool at 15, and we've seen Tripoli dropping to about 17 degrees. 16 towards 7, Agadez at 19 degrees. 21 rather, and then it does get a bit hotter along the west coast. So particularly from Las Palmas through Nouakchott, as well as all the way towards Dakar in Senegal, do expect a bit of hot weather. No chance of rainfall. It is expected to be a clear day. The western side of Africa expected to be quite hot. Miami 29, Bamako also into the upper 20s. Temperatures going from 28 in Abidjan towards Lagos, it will reach a maximum of 30 degrees. So some sunny skies are expected along the west coast, particularly along the southern part. But as you move towards the far western side, it's mostly expected to be cloudy, and a bit of sunshine will be coming in a bit later into the afternoon. That's where I leave it for the weather for now. Stay tuned. There'll be more weather here on the program.
Are you saying the king must go to jail? You are not royal blood, therefore you are going to serve time on behalf of the king. Where does the public protector stand on this matter? Are you with the marches, for the marches, against the march? If this is your ancestor, it is very much his ancestor as well, because this is the cradle of humankind. Is there God somewhere in your science? Drinking the blood of a person with albinism gives extra magical powers. A man of the cloth is involved here because it would mean that somehow religion is being brought into this part of the myth. What do you say to it?
Watch Question Time with me, Mpho Tsedu, Monday to Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
Preparing for victory requires intense effort and teamwork. When you get to it, there is no turning back, because all eyes are on you. When it's action time, nothing should stand in your way. Sports Live tackles and analyzes all the sport action. This is the home of all your sport news, updates, and more. Sports Live, weekdays at 8:30.
Morning Live sets the agenda for the day. We bring you the latest local and international news. We are on the ball with all your sports activities and results. We give you the latest business update.
We bring you the latest weather every time.
Watch Morning Live every weekday morning at 6 o'clock, bringing you everything you need to know before you go. Sharp, sharp, 8 tada.
The act of travel is an eye-opening activity that not only expands your view but is a major part of any country's economy. South Africa's spectacular scenery, friendly people and world-class infrastructure make it one of the most desired destinations in the world. Despite tough global economic conditions, the tourism sector is steadily growing. But the idea that one has to go far in order to explore is quickly changing as the sector encourages local exploration. South Africa's history has been one of confrontation, but is now also known as one of reconciliation. World-class sites have been established to commemorate the country's past and celebrate its newfound unity. An area of tourism that is often overlooked is the question of the arts and tourism. Although many cities have not taken advantage of this element to attract international visitors, the domestic artistic tourism is fast becoming a key drawcard for local exploration. A-grade exhibition centers are creating modern spaces to showcase what makes up the African expression. A good dose of creative capital is playing a major role as entrepreneurs create new and exciting ways to sell their products, thus creating new vibrant local spaces that are changing the face of our communities. South Africa has earmarked tourism as a key sector with excellent potential for growth, and a vast amount is being poured into changing the face of our spaces, making them vibrant, urban, and exciting.
The latest news from the SABC's online news services. On our website, breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
It's 10:00 hours Central Africa time on this Thursday, the 28th of January 2016. This is Newsroom on SABC News, Channel 404. If you've just joined us, Jumbo Africa, and a very warm welcome to the second hour. I'm Elvis Preston. I'll be with you until 12 o'clock. Now remember, today we're asking you a very important question. We're asking you that question in light of the African Union Summit. Is peace in Africa a reality and a possibility? That's the question we pose to you. You can let us know on our Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom and on our Facebook page. But first, let's take a look at your news headlines. The Reserve Bank is expected to announce another interest rate hike this afternoon, following the first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. President Jacob Zuma says the controversial pension laws or tax laws will only be reviewed after 2 years as labor unions threaten to strike over the issue. And the situation remains tense at Cape St. Francis in the Eastern Cape as sporadic veld fires continue to flare up. Now, Kendall Makamate will be back a little bit later with your sports news, but here he is just to give us a brief view of what's going to happen.
How can I actually let go of this opportunity to share with the viewers out there exactly what we've got in the sports? Be sure you stick around for this, because we're going to be talking about how Serena Williams and Angelique Kerber will be meeting in the final of the Australian Open, and Serena is just one away from Steffi Graf's 1988 record of 22 Grand Slams. And of course, later on today, Djokovic and Federer, they'll be playing in their semi-final match. What a matchup that's bound to be in Florido Priya. Everybody thinks that he's about to retire from all competitive rugby. But more about all of that in about 20 minutes' time. Back to you, Ross.
Thank you, Kendall. He will be back a little bit later, so stay tuned. Top story this hour. The African Union Commission chairperson, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, says though the African Union is lagging behind in achieving its objectives, they are hopeful of the future. He said they are happy with women empowerment so far.
Years away from our target year to silence the guns. An empowering of women, men and children in the few countries still plagued by conflict and in the regions facing the threats of terrorism and violent extremism. We must not be deterred from our goal of bringing about peace. The peoples of Mali, South Sudan, Darfur, Libya, Somalia, others can live in peace and harmony and can join the march towards the Africa we want. Let me therefore remind us of the words of Kwame Nkrumah when he said, "The task ahead is indeed great. And yet it is a noble and glorious challenge, a challenge which calls for the courage to dream, to believe, and to dare. The courage to do, to envision, and to fight. The courage to work, and the courage to achieve. To achieve the highest and the fullest greatness. Dare we ask for more in life?"
The United States is looking to the African Union Summit and what progress heads of state make this coming weekend over the floundering peace agreement in South Sudan. The U.S. believes the process is at a crossroads after a panel of experts report urges the Security Council to institute an arms embargo on the country. The panel argued that both Riek Machar and Salva Kiir qualified to be sanctioned over atrocities committed under their leadership during the 2-year civil war.
A 22nd of January deadline for the formation of a transitional government has come and gone, as the IGAD-led peace deal's implementation once again hangs in the balance.
The United States has long made clear that we are very much open to considering whatever tools we think would help get things back on track. You know, this was something we said before there was a peace agreement. It is now something we are very committed to in terms of implementation. We have made reference, in prior resolutions to an arms embargo and to the possibility of considering that. And I think it's something, again, that we have to look at alongside designations if it is a means of stabilizing the situation on the ground or getting the implementation of the agreement back on track.
But their openness to an arms embargo has not been shared by all council members, with Russia expressing concerns that its implementation could be one-sided to the detriment of the government.
This is something, again, we'd want to hear out of the African Union Summit, what progress they have made pushing President Kiir and Riek Machar back into implementation, and then take that into account as we discuss South Sudan here. But I want to underscore, fighting is happening, people are dying, the situation in South Sudan is not stable. And so the stakes, as I think was reflected in the report, could not be higher for the people of South Sudan.
The UN has long held the view that the civil war could have been averted had it not been for the country's leadership sparking a civil war along ethnic dimensions in one of the world's poorest countries. Sherwin Briceby's SABC News, New York.
Here at home, the South African Reserve Bank is expected to announce another interest rate hike this afternoon, following its first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. The statement is expected to paint a bleak picture about the local economic outlook. Economists say the bank is likely to make further large downward adjustments to its GDP growth estimates. The committee is set to reflect on the worsening inflation outlook driven largely by drought, a weaker rand, and high electricity tariffs. Most economists expect the bank to raise policy rates by 50 basis points. Meanwhile, the African National Congress says it is determined to protect the country from experiencing any further economic downgrades. The ruling party expressed confidence in South Africa's global competitiveness after rising from 56 to 49. Its three-day NEC Lekgotla ended in Tshwane last night. The summit of the ANC's decision-making body dealt with urgent priorities facing the government. The topical issue of racism was also put on the agenda. However, the Lekgotla mainly focused on economic issues. It issued a stern warning to the United States on AGOA, saying that South Africa will not be dictated to by Washington on matters unrelated to trade relations. The ANC recommitted itself to invest more in infrastructure and social development, or investment rather. On the upcoming local government elections, the party says it is confident that it will do well. It aims to win back the city of Cape Town from the DA and retain all other metros. The presidency says the newly signed pension tax laws will go ahead with a review only in 2 years' time. This comes after outrage from private and public labor unions. The tax laws limit lump sum payments to workers to just a third and forces them to convert the rest into annuities accessed via a monthly allowance. President Jacob Zuma says complaints by the unions that there was never extensive consultation on the tax administration laws are incorrect and misleading. He says there was a total of 40 meetings with NEDLAC and labor unions between 2012 and last year. He says there was also a public comment period, and those comments were considered when the law was finalized. Zuma adds that Parliament required that the law, which comes into play on March the 1st, be reviewed in 2 years. This is despite Labour Federation COSATU and Metal Workers Union NUMSA threatening massive strike action if the laws are not repeated. It's not repealed, I beg your pardon. Now, at least 3 houses have been damaged and a number of fishermen boats completely destroyed in yet another flare-up of bushfires in the Eastern Cape resort town of Cape St. Francis. Since the weekend, fire breakouts have had community members in a panic.
From firefighters to sea rescue teams and volunteers, all have been battling with sporadic fire outbreaks since the weekend. Last night, the raging fire came very close to the township area and the airfields. At least 3 houses have been damaged and a number of fishermen boats completely destroyed. As a safety measure, the elderly and families with young children were evacuated. Some residents chose to safeguard their homes and monitor the situation. The community has also taken to social media asking for donations to keep firefighters fueled up with food. They also did some fundraising to bring in a second privately owned helicopter to keep the blazes under control. 3 teams of 20 have been dispatched throughout the area to monitor the situation throughout the night. Concerns remain over strong winds, which could flare up the fires again.
We've put out all blazes, all flares, so we hope that there will be no flares coming up. But with the westerly wind that is coming up in the early mornings of tomorrow morning, starting on very slow pace and running up until 45 degrees or 45 speed limit, so we've put a plan in place.
Police are still investigating the cause of the fire. Reporting SABC News, Cape St. Francis.
Newly released statistics show that rhino poaching levels dropped for the first time in a decade in South Africa. South Africa is home to 20,000 rhinos. That's accounting for more than 80% of the world's population. The new statistics were released as yet another rhino calf was born, but unfortunately abandoned by its mother in the Western Cape.
At under a month old, this rhino calf represents the future of its species, one where survival is increasingly trumping the odds. The animal was abandoned by its mother at birth, but was rescued by staff at the Aquila Private Game Reserve just outside Cape Town.
The anti-poaching teams, which are situated all in our mountains, we can't see them, but they're there. Our rhinos are under 24-hour surveillance, sent a radio message through to say that they suspected that a rhino was injured in the bush, went out immediately and they discovered a calf, a rhino calf. Rhinos don't walk immediately, and he was lying on the ground, and they realized that a birth had happened and the mother was not in sight.
The calf is now under 24-hour supervision and lives with his own carer, who sees to its needs and plays the role normally fulfilled by his mother. Mud bath and guided bushwalks are now part of the calf's daily routine.
We give him a bottle of 3 liters. It depends if maybe he's more hungry and he takes 4 liters in, and then we take him for a walk for half an hour into the bush. He normally sticks close vicinity by you. He loves his walks. He runs up and down. He's very boisterous, playful. They need to get that exercise because in a natural wild they would tend to walk with the parents.
Plans to integrate the animal back into his family unit have proved to be unsuccessful so far. The parents have shown no interest in accepting him back, but it hasn't dampened the little calf's spirit at all. The young rhino calf is also said to love music, with his favorite tune amply being the theme from the hit movie The Lion King.
Iraqi migrants fed up with the long asylum application process, far-right violence and paltry conditions at temporary shelters in Germany returned back to Iraq on Wednesday. Women, children and men arrived in the northern Kurdish city of Erbil on one-way travel documents issued by the Iraqi embassy in Berlin.
It's not yet a flood, but a steady stream of Iraqi asylum seekers in Germany are going home. Frustrated by the protracted asylum process and miserable conditions at shelters, they've decided they're better off returning to their war-torn country.
When I return to Baghdad, I will kneel down and kiss the earth.
Long lines like these at the Office for Health and Social Affairs, where the migrants are required to register, contributed to the frustration. Almost 3,000 Iraqis applied for asylum in Germany last year, but Germany says the number of them choosing to return began climbing in September. Now, Iraqi Airways offers 3 flights per week, including this one from Berlin. Many of the passengers are traveling on one-way travel documents, issued after they either lost or destroyed their old passports. Arriving in Erbil, the weariness of the round-trip journey shows.
I regret going there. I wish we had not. I wish we had drowned in the sea and we had never gone there.
Both Erbil in the northern Kurdish autonomous region and Baghdad are outside the territory under Islamic State control and have not seen heavy conflict, but bomb attacks occur regularly in Baghdad. But these disenchanted Iraqis would rather build their future in their old home than in a new one that did not live up to their dreams.
Security forces killed 20 Kurdish militants in southeast Turkey with a rebel attack killing 3 Turkish soldiers. Now, hundreds of locals, including children and the elderly, fled the curfew-bound areas of Diyarbakir's Sur district as gunfire and blasts resounded and police helicopters flew overhead.
Turkish soldiers in their armored vehicle looking for militants of the outlawed PKK. For weeks now, security forces have been pounding the pro-Kurdish rebel group in the southeastern town of Cisre, in the most intense violence this region has seen in 2 decades. 20 militants and 3 soldiers were reported killed in the latest clashes. This as authorities widen a curfew in nearby Diyarbakir, the largest town of this mainly Kurdish region. Residents of the town's historic Sur district have been asked to leave their homes as security operations continue.
Nereye gidecek ama ne kira verebiliyor ne bir şey edebiliyor nereye gidelim? Bu savaşın durması lazım. Hele git halimize bak köpek hali de. Vallahi kahvaltı yememişiz abile oluyor.
Turkey's conflict with the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, goes back to the mid-1980s and has claimed some 40,000 lives. The PKK says it's fighting for an independent Kurdish territory in the region, but the government says it's just as determined not to give it to them.
Facebook easily topped Wall Street's most optimistic estimates for both revenue and earnings in the 4th quarter. The social media giant reported that it earned 79 cents per share on $5.84 billion in revenue in the quarter. The highest estimates on the street had called for earnings of 75 cents. Now, Facebook's dominance in mobile advertising helped to allay Wall Street concerns over its heavy investment in messaging service WhatsApp and the virtual reality unit Oculus, which have not yet generated profits. Facebook shares rose almost 12% in after-hours trading on Wednesday. They were helped by the Chief Financial Officer David Werner's comment on a call with analysts that he expected operating expenses to increase by 30 to 40% over the course of the year. Now, 2015 was a year of increasing repression across much of Africa, according to an annual report from the Human Rights Watch. And in light of the African Union Summit, which is taking place, human rights are a main focus, or their main focus particularly, is in Burundi and other Central African communities and countries. Joining us in studio is Human Rights Watch Devas Mavinga. A very good morning to you, Mr. Mavinga, and welcome.
Thank you.
First and foremostly, according to you and Human Rights Watch, what are some of the main issues on human rights that the African Union should address?
The key challenge in Africa for human rights really is conflict. So if you look at those countries that are in conflict, for example, Burundi, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, this is where you have grave violations of human rights. People fleeing in Burundi, over 200,000 people have fled that country and are now refugees in Tanzania and Rwanda. So this is a key area. The second one is political repression by governments that are resisting democratic values. And for the African Union, it is important to acknowledge that human rights are part of the African agenda. This year, it is on women's rights. When you talk of these conflicts that I've referred to, it is mainly women who suffer most. You know, sexual abuse as a weapon has been used in South Sudan as well as in Burundi. And there is a need for the African Union to take a leadership so that all the other aspects of the world, including the EU and the UN, would follow the example set by the African Union to say state sovereignty is not an excuse for abuse of human rights, because Africa has committed itself to respect human rights in terms of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and in terms of a number of constitutions in Africa, including a very good example from South Africa in terms of a very strong constitution that supports human rights. But the challenge remains that of implementing those rights to ensure that all the peoples of Africa enjoy the rights that are in those constitutions.
Let's take a look at Burundi, the human rights situation in that country. Paint us a picture of what is currently happening.
Burundi is on the brink of a serious catastrophe, which was triggered by the president's desire and push for a third term, which was resisted by the opposition and which then led to a clampdown by government forces, security forces, on opponents, including on civil society groups and the media. Now you have armed groups also involved in extreme violence. It has led to the displacement of people who are fleeing the violence. Women have suffered in the process, and now there is resistance from Burundi to initiatives by the AU to try and intervene and have 5,000 troops on the ground to support the peace process. So really it is about political power by the elite there and resistance to interventions from the outside communities, including the AU and the UN Security Council, which has tried to push for a peace deal and to say there is need to honor and protect the people of Burundi. And I believe it is important, when we look at the example of Burundi, to look back and see what happened in Rwanda in 1994, the genocide. That cannot be repeated, not under the AU's watch. So there is need for action, immediate action to be taken. There is simply no time to waste in talk shops. The AU must take leadership.
And what sort of leadership and action should be taken, according to Human Rights Watch?
The first one that is there is that the AU should not give precedence or priority to the concept of state sovereignty, where the Burundi leadership and President Pierre Nkurunziza would say that there is no intervention without an explicit acceptance by Burundi. So the AU must move in and support. The UN Security Council must put sufficient pressure on Burundi. It cannot be what we witnessed in Rwanda in '94. So there is need for that kind of action, notwithstanding whether or not the government of Burundi is willing.
East and Central Africa imposed new restrictions on pressure on the opponents, the political opponents, journalists, and even rights activists in that countries, often to meet their electoral goals. Can you tell us more about this? What is happening in that part of the continent? East and West Africa, because we've seen this happening.
What we have in West Africa, a key challenge also is that of the rise of terrorist groups, particularly in Nigeria, Boko Haram, but also there is the continued spread of dictatorship and resistance to promoting the rights of citizens. We've seen this in Equatorial Guinea as well. We have seen terrorist activities in Mali, resulting in massive displacements as well. And this shows that the AU has a long way to go in terms of ensuring that its commitments to women's rights, to human rights, are fulfilled in all these parts of Africa. But there is hope, because there are indications that there are talks now, and that state sovereignty going forward will not be an excuse for human rights abuses.
Now, we know that Burundi is going to be top of mind for the AU, but Sudan is another country that has got its own problems.
Absolutely, and there is a need to have a focus that says wherever human rights abuses take place, there is no exception. There is need for action, and there is need to respect all human rights in all parts of Africa. But for Sudan, we have had challenges, particularly also with South Africa, when the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir visited South Africa in June 2015. There is need for support for international justice, and South Africa, as a beacon of human rights and justice, needs to maintain that status and continue to play a key role in ensuring that there is human rights respect in Sudan, in Burundi, and in other parts, as it has been doing in the past.
Mr. Mavinga, thank you so much for your time, and let's hope that everything pans out very well for the Human Rights Commission. That is Mr. Dewa Mavinga, who is from Human Rights, chatting to us about the AU summit that's currently happening, and of course the issues in Burundi, as well as the other parts of the African continent. Meanwhile, African leaders have begun taking a hard look at the challenges facing the continent. And the situation is not particularly pleasing. Opening the African Union Executive Council of Ministers meeting, the AU chair, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, warned that resolving Africa's challenges is going to take more than just lip service.
We are but 4 years away from our target year to silence the guns. And suffering of women, men and children in the few countries still plagued by conflict and in the regions facing the threats of terrorism and violent extremism. We must not be deterred from our goal of bringing about peace. The peoples of Mali, South Sudan, Darfur, Libya, Somalia, others can live in peace and harmony and can join the march towards the Africa we want.
Now, the perception of corruption in South Africa is stabilizing. According to Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, South Africa's corruption rank has shifted from 67 to 61st. Now, the index rates the perceived level of public sector corruption on a scale of 0 to 100. Now, for more on this, we joined in studio by Mr. David Lewis from Corruption Watch. Sir, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Thank you.
First and foremostly, what does this mean for South Africa?
Well, it means that over the last, initially having dropped quite precipitously after the first few years that we were measured, over the last 3 years, South Africa, the perception of corruption in South Africa as measured by the respondents to those surveys indicate that the perceptions have somewhat stabilized. Our scores remained about the same for the last 3 years, and our place in the index has remained also pretty much the same.
So 67 to 61?
Yeah, 67 to 61 with the score remaining the same. That's largely a result of other countries having gone down in score rather than us having gone up. But it's, it's moderately good news. We could have gotten worse and we haven't.
Ideally, where should we be as a country?
Oh, ideally we should be as high up that ranking as we possibly can. I mean, our 61 out of 168 countries puts us in a category of countries who are perceived to have a serious problem with corruption. This is not nearly as bad as many of the countries below us. I mean, many of our BRICS, all of our BRICS partners, in fact, are below us. But a country like Russia, which, where corruption is endemic, we're not in that league yet, and we don't want to get into that league because there is big trouble.
So how does the index actually work? If we're now at 67, what does it actually say in terms of corruption? Is it from 1 to 100? Are we very bad, or are we just sort of average?
Well, there are two measures. Number one on the ranking means that you're perceived to be the least corrupt country of those surveyed, and we are at number 61, so we're the 61st least surveyed. And then there's a score ranging from 0 to 44, where 100 is perceived as very clean and 0 as very corrupt, and we're at 44, so we're below 50. We're as I said, in the category of countries who are perceived to have a serious corruption problem, but not the worst by any stretch of the imagination.
So how are the index compiled and put together?
This particular index is compiled as a composite of a number of surveys taken during the year. I think in the South African case, 9 surveys taken during the year by organizations like the African Development Bank, the World Economic Forum, those sorts of institutions. And the respondents are largely private and public sector leaders, journalists, kind of opinion makers, I guess. And I think that those are people who perceive that in important pockets of South African government, like the Treasury, the Auditor General, there is real concern about corruption and good things are being done. But these tend to be overshadowed and counterbalanced by real problems that we have.
Now, besides the index, do you then also recommend in terms of what government should do in order to rectify or even to go up the scale?
The TI survey, the Transparency International survey, doesn't make policy recommendations. I mean, we certainly, as the local chapter in South Africa, have ideas about what should be done, and this is what we try and advocate for. These are the ideas we try and advocate for with a greater or lesser degree of success, but that's what we do.
But what are the sort of things that, if you look at the index, that South Africa can do better?
Well, there are a huge range of things, and they range from policy reforms like tightening up the public procurement system, which the Treasury and the Chief Procurement Officer are really trying to do, and they're trying to do valiantly and moving in the right direction, to the kind of work that we do, which is to encourage the public to pressurize for better policing, better ethics from their leadership. But I think that our big problem is both at the at both ends of the spectrum. Petty corruption that people experience in their daily life, from the traffic cop, the housing allocation official, and the like. And then the perception that if you are powerful and well-connected, a mayor, a national government leader, a provincial councillor, then you can get away with pretty much anything. And until it's demonstrated that there are actually consequences for engaging in corruption, no matter who you are and how well you're placed, then we are going to really struggle to turn this sort of thing around.
Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us in studio. That was Mr. David Lewis. He is from Corruption Watch. Now, remember that we're asking you a very important question today on the question of the day. In light of the African Union Summit that's taking place, is peace in Africa really a possibility or reality? I want to know from you on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. You can also do so on the Facebook page. But right now, it's time to take a break. Kendall Makamate is back with your sports news right after that.
Great.
As African leaders gather for the AU Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, SABC News is on the ground bringing you all the latest coverage as it happens. For all the latest updates and issues arising on the summit, stay tuned to SABC News Channel 404.
The son of Africa, Trevor Noah, is leaving America in stitches.
I never dreamed that I would one day have, well, two things really. An indoor toilet and a job as host of The Daily Show.
We are the first to bring you the latest films around the globe.
Dear white people, the minimum requirement of black friends needed to not seem racist has just been raised to 2.
Cobbins Asako is a gifted blind musician, a master of soothing notes from the piano.
I love to sit behind the piano. You know, that also helps me find inspiration.
Join Rifula Mulwa every Friday for that 1-hour weekly dose of art and entertainment news at 9 p.m. on Trends.
Welcome back. We're bringing you great news this morning as South African has won a title at this year's first Grand Slam tennis tournament of the year. Top seeds Lucas Sithole and his American partner David Wagner have won the quad wheelchair doubles finals in straight sets at the Australian Open in Melbourne. Meanwhile, top-seeded American Serena Williams will face 7th seed Angelique Kerber of Germany in the women's final this coming Saturday. Williams crushed 4th seed Agnieszka Radwanska of Poland, while Kerber beat Johanna Konta of Britain in straight sets.
The first set was one-way traffic as Williams overpowered Radwanska from the get-go. The Pole, who was on a 13-match winning streak, failed to win a game as Williams quickly clinched at 6-love in just 21 minutes. In the second, Radwanska seemed to lift her game. Despite trailing 1-3, she broke back and levelled matches at 3-all. But as usual, the American did not take long before she was in the lead again. She broke the Radwanska serve in the 9th game and held her own to bank the set 6-4 and reach her 7th final at the Australian Open.
I'm honestly a little surprised. I feel like, I was just, I took so much time off trying to prepare for this, and now I'm in the final. So whatever happens, I'm very excited to be coming out and playing in yet another final, and, it's just going to be great no matter what.
In contrast to the first semi-final, the opening set between Kerber and Konta was a much more balanced affair. Kerber, however, made the most of her experience to win at 7-5. The German then steamrolled over her opponent in the second, She clinched it 6-2 to advance to her first ever Grand Slam final, where Williams awaits.
It's just amazing to play against number one in the first Grand Slam of the year, and I'm really looking forward to take this challenge. I mean, of course, I must play my best tennis to have a chance against her, but actually I will try to give everything. I have nothing to lose on Saturday.
The women's final is scheduled to get underway at 10:30 in the morning. Liesel Zankel, SABC News.
Now, news coming out of Japan has it that Springbok great Furido Priya may have played his last competitive match over the weekend when his side, Suntory's son Goliath, walloped Toyota Shoki Shuttles 78-14 in Osaka. Du Preez captained the Springboks in their last two matches at last year's Rugby World Cup in England. He famously scored the winning try against the spirited Wales in the quarter-final of the tournament, earning the team a semi-final berth against eventual champions New Zealand. Du Preez was a darling for the Bulls faithful, played 76 tests for the Springboks since making his debut in 2004. He's also been a pivotal player for Suntory, having joined them in 2011. Saru has confirmed that Du Preez is not contracted to South African rugby, nor any South African franchise. We certainly hope that his resignation, or retirement rather, is dealt with a bang, because he's been a true servant to South African rugby. Moving on to other sports news, Orlando Pirates will be eyeing all 3 points in order to change their poor domestic form when they take on fierce rivals Kaizer Chiefs on Saturday afternoon at the FNB Stadium in an Absa Premiership League match.
Standings are to be taken into account. Orlando Pirates come to this clash as the underdogs. Pirates sit in 11th position on the log with only 16 points after 14 games. A victory over their arch-rivals will give Eric Tinkler a little more time to dig his way out of the hole he finds himself in. The starting lineup for Pirates has been inconsistent for the past few games.
Some people didn't get time, other people, we are a team, we are 35. Others they get injured, others they are not on form. After the year waiting for game time also. We need everybody in the team.
Both coaches will look to the derby as an invitation to revive their campaigns for the season. In recent years, this game has often disappointed, with coaches approaching the game with a negative mindset intent on avoiding defeat. The last time the two met, Chiefs won on penalties after a goalless draw.
I can say it doesn't ease any pressure. The itself, it has a lot of pressure. So I believe both teams will go there and give their best, and I think it's going to be a good game because we want to win because we just lost now, and they will come to that game also wanting the maximum points. So by itself, it has a lot of pressure for both teams.
The Glamour Boys are 4th on the log with 25 points from 15 matches, trailing leaders Sundowns by 8 points.
And finally, the Russian Prosecutor General's office is reviewing a report by the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, which exposed widespread cheating and corruption in Russian athletics and led to Russia's indefinite ban from all competition. Russia's sports minister, Vitaly Mutko, announced that the Prosecutor General's office was willing to initiate criminal proceedings where necessary. WADA's report alleged widespread corruption and collusion that added up to a state-sponsored drugs culture in a sporting superpower. The Commission found a deeply rooted culture of cheating in Russian athletics, which it said Russian state security services colluded with, and also identified what it called systemic failures in the global governing body, the IAAF. The Commission also claimed that the WADA-accredited anti-doping laboratory in Moscow destroyed over 1,400 samples shortly before an inspection. The IAAF suspended the Russian Athletics Federation in mid-November last year, following the allegations, despite both the country's athletes and sports minister having denied involvement in or knowledge of doping. After the ban, Russia announced a 3-month roadmap to clean up its act, with the nation's Olympic Committee leading efforts to ensure honest athletes can compete at Rio 2016. That's where we leave it with the sport. I know Evan Janssen is standing by to give you more news and analysis. Stay close.
SABC News. We report, contextualize and present news and current affairs honestly, fairly and fully. We consider it a duty to provide consistent, relevant, useful and top quality information and analysis. Our mission is to provide credible, accurate and interesting news programming, bringing news into everyone's homes in everyone's languages. Thank you, South Africa, for relying on SABC News for quality news output and for making us your #1 source of information. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
As African leaders gather for the AU Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, SABC News is on the ground bringing you all the latest coverage as it happens. For all the latest updates and issues arising on the summit, stay tuned to SABC News Channel 404.
Welcome back. The African Union Summit has been underway this week and will soon come to an end. This year's theme has a strong focus on human rights, particularly those of women. But the African Union has also been faced with security challenges on the continent as unrest continues in countries such as Burundi, South Sudan and the wider Great Lakes region. Now, to tell us a little bit more about what's being discussed at the summit, we're joined now from the summit in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia by our very own foreign editor, Sophie Mukwena. Very good morning to you, Sophie. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Sophie, you've been there for a couple of days. Tell us about the atmosphere at the summit and also what have been the key points that you think have come out in the first couple of days.
Well, Eben, what I can say is that the ministerial summit has started and ministers are discussing different issues. In an hour's time, we are expecting a committee on politics to brief us in terms of the status of the organization itself, the AU. They will touch on issues such as peace and security. They will touch on issues such as the economy and social issues, but also give us an indication on progress made in terms of finalizing their agenda. We saw earlier on the chairperson of the commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, having different bilateral meetings with UK, China, and other small countries with the aim of enhancing the relations between the institution and other multilateral bodies or other countries. We expect President Zuma to touch down around 12 o'clock. And we expect him to have closed-door meetings today, but tomorrow he has got a tight schedule where he will be looking at different bilaterals with different countries with the aim of enhancing South Africa's relations with other countries.
Now, Sophie, security has kind of jumped on top of this summit a little bit. It's not an extraordinary summit, it's an ordinary summit that deals with human rights. But security, especially Burundi, elsewhere in the Great Lakes, is a key point of discussion. Do you think there'll be a way to further negotiations with specifically Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza after this summit?
Well, of course, Burundi is a thorny issue because you are aware that recently we saw the Security Council sending a delegation in Bujumbura where they met the head of state in Burundi, but also different stakeholders. We were told then when I spoke to the leader of the delegation that they have come up with proposal. One proposal is that both the AU and the Security Council must send a team of observers to go and get first-hand information in terms of what's happening on the ground so that they can come up with a report that will recommend action to be taken to address the current crisis in Burundi. We also spoke to the Foreign Affairs Minister of Burundi. Burundi has welcomed the announcement that the Security Council is recommending that there should be observers to go and get first-hand information in terms of what's happening on the ground, because that has been the concern from the Burundi to say AU cannot announce that they want to deploy force when they haven't been on the ground to really get first-hand information of what's happening on the ground. The country is arguing that currently the so-called violence that's being reported is only in Bujumbura, the capital city, but also it's isolated incident. It's not the entire country. They also argue that there's no way Burundi will descend into civil war again because they have learned in the past that this is not an option. But we expect the heads of state to come up with a solution and also to tell us what's likely to happen going forward, because clearly ministers couldn't resolve this matter. It's a difficult issue. It needs heads of state to give direction.
Sophie, now, the Commission chairperson, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, she's raised concerns about not enough women in politics on the continent, and we know that the rights of women are very much on the agenda at this summit. What are you expecting from her over the next couple of days with regards to this?
Yes, indeed, the theme of the summit is about human rights. And Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma was at pains to call on leaders and stakeholders to ensure that women do participate in different structures, may it be business, public sector, but also at the political level. There is no way women can address their issues if they don't participate in all levels of society or structures of society. Politics is a critical institution or sector where women must participate. You cannot address women's concern when we don't have enough women ministers in very key positions such as finance, be it international relations, be it peace and security, because during conflicts, women are the ones who are affected. But also at a higher level in the presidency, if you don't have women president, how do you expect women issues to take a center stage? Because a woman president or a woman leader will be able to look at broader challenges facing women. And it is for that reason Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma is saying it's time that women in the continent but around the world to take their rightful place. I know that the UN Women is also serious about this issue. Dr. Mlambo Nguga on many occasions during the UN General Assembly last year, calling on leaders of the world to ensure that they took women issues serious, because women's rights are human rights.
Sophie, thank you very much for that update and the wonderful pictures you're bringing us from the very prosperous city of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. That's our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, giving us that live update from the summit itself. Yes, lots of things on the agenda. Well, the focus this year, human rights, the rights of women. Sophie will be there for the rest of the week giving us updates. Now, do you fancy a cappuccino? How about a special roast or filter coffee, a latte or espresso? Coffee helps many professionals start their day, sets the scene for first dates, some say, and invites friends into homes for a good old chat. But for coffee lovers in Uganda, making a cup gets very competitive.
Uganda recently held its 9th Barista Championship, an annual contest meant to promote the country's coffee and unveil the brewer with the best coffee-making skills. 60 people took part in the championship, which required them to prepare espressos, cappuccinos, and original beverages for 4 judges within 15 minutes. At barista competitions, judges often look for a thick, elastic espresso, a cappuccino topped with high-caliber foam texture, and a unique coffee invention to please the eyes and taste buds. In the end, Dennis Agabo won the title. A new culture has formed around coffee drinking as various cafes have opened in Uganda, as well as Kenya, Nigeria and Rwanda. Shops have become popular meeting venues for a growing middle class.
Appreciate coffee in a way I never thought possible. You've got different coffee beans, that's what I've come to discover, and the creativity from the contestants. It's not just the normal coffee whereby you just go get coffee beans and just drink. They have taught me that you can actually mix up the coffees with one of your favorite ingredients and you actually get something that you actually really love.
Uganda is a small consumer of coffee. We export a lot of coffee, but we consume little coffee. So this is one of the activities we do to actually encourage the consumption of coffee in Uganda, because I think Uganda consumes only about 2% of what they produce. So we want actually Uganda to become the first consumers of the coffee that they produce.
Many Ugandans have always preferred tea despite growing some of the world's best coffee. Consumption remains low as most of the produce is exported. Uganda is one of Africa's biggest exporters with about 500,000 small farmers. This is Uganda's biggest commodity export, accounting for up to 30% of the country's foreign exchange earnings. But Africa's largest producer, Ethiopia, which is also said to be the birthplace of coffee, drinks up half of its 330,000 tons annual production because the population has traditionally enjoyed the brew. Entrepreneurs like Anderson Wer are capitalizing on the sector and using cafes to entice customers keen to try something new. He runs the Amagara Cafe in Kampala.
Almost every building in Kampala is having a coffee shop. And that, compared with what was happening 5 years ago, is a plus for the country. We are literally saying the country is in the right direction. And I believe in the next 10 years, Uganda coffee consumption will be very competitive in this part of the world, especially in the East African region.
Coffee is big business in East Africa, which produces some of the world's finest beans. And although many of these nations don't always reap the rewards of their exports, drinking a cuppa is fast becoming a trend.
Let's take a quick look now at some of the front pages from around the African continent. We start in Zimbabwe this morning, where the Chronicle reports that Zimbabwe Teachers Association has taken the government to court over its decision to cancel teachers' annual leave. Then in Namibia, the Namibian reports that despite urging the country's two main universities not to deny students registration because of unsettled fees, the Minister of Higher Education, Ita Kanji Murangi, said the country cannot afford having free tertiary education. Then in Swaziland, the Observer reports that the 2015 matric results pass rate has showed a decrease of 0.36% when compared with 2014. This was revealed by the Education Minister, Dr. Phineas Magagula, during the official release of the results there yesterday. Now, according to the World Meteorological Organization, 2015 had the highest global average surface temperature. 15 of the 16 hottest years on record have all been this century, with 2015 being hotter than the record set in 2014. Although the effects of the El Niño are starting to fade, climate change will still have increasingly negative impacts for the next 50 years. Now, Tsietse Munari is here with me to tell us what difference does 1 degree Celsius really make?
Yeah, people think 1 degree is not a lot, but I've actually just realized something really interesting now. Is that so the Swaziland newspaper that you had just now said 0.3% decrease in metric pass rate. So if you look at the 1 degree increase in temperature affecting metric pass rate, so there's a bit of a relationship there. The higher temperatures go, the lower the pass rate becomes. The lower
pass rate. That's a stretch.
It's a bit of a stretch. But 1 degree is quite massive. If you look at this really nice visual I have here, this was done by NASA, by the way, and they indicate how temperatures have been increasing for the last 50 or so years. Okay, and I asked to stop it here in 2004, right? This is a 4 or 5 year period. And just look already how different it is becoming in terms of just as little as 15 years ago, the whole map was almost blue, indicating that the change was not as significant. But now, between the 80s and just around now, it got really worse, especially over the northern hemisphere countries where there's a lot of snow and a lot of ice. And when that melts, what happens? The sea level will rise. And when sea level rises, then there's a lot of problems that we're going to encounter.
Communities at risk. But
first of all, flooding, quite big thing. But then the increasing of the number of storms, extreme storms that we can get, especially here with the tropical cyclones and as well as the typhoons and hurricanes in the United States and in Southeast Asia. So all of that being caused by that single degree increase.
Jeez, let's hope it doesn't get up to 6. Then we've got a catastrophe on our hands. But the hottest year now, a couple of years in a row. Lots of snow. We see the biggest blizzard we've seen in American history, it seems. In the US, a meter of snow fell there in no time.
Yeah.
How do you view this kind of contrast?
Yeah, that's a bit of a, a defector type of thing. I get a lot of these pessimists and they say, you guys talking about warming and warming, just have a look at this big storm at the back there. And, blizzards coming in and it's getting colder and colder for some places and getting hotter and hotter. But that's what we've been preaching all along. Not even preaching, that's what we've been showing people is that with climate change, so many variables are at play that things are getting more difficult to predict. Extreme storms like these are getting more difficult to predict, and also they're becoming even more extreme. So when we used to a tropical cyclone that comes with gusts or wind speed of around 250 kilometers an hour, now they're coming at 320 kilometers an hour, and they're more frequent. So now this storm that hit the east of the United States also is a result of that. You get this burst of out of nowhere just because of these uncontrollable changes that are coming in from El Ninos, and we've had some severe droughts. Now they're getting some severe cold bursts in the United States. So you can see it actually is a climate change. It does not necessarily mean it's getting warmer. It means changing in variables that we cannot live with.
Tsetse Munare, always covering the downside, telling us there it's more difficult to predict. More difficult to predict. That makes his job a little bit more difficult, is what he's telling us. The next 10 years are going to be difficult for him to predict the weather. Tsetse Munare, always nice to have you with us. Thank you for being with us this morning and giving us a look at the difference that a degree makes. It's very significant. We could be facing 6 by the end of the century. We'll be back at the top of the hour with a complete update with Elvis. Don't go away.
Makamelo Sekhuntse, one strong woman who said no to hunger. She never allowed circumstances to pull her down. At daybreak, she is up and running in the streets of Johannesburg to make her living. After 12 hours of hard work, she goes back home being able to put food on the table. Join me, Bule Molebatsi, on your show about those who take on and conquer life challenges every Saturday at 5:30.
As African leaders gather for the AU Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, SABC News is on the ground bringing you all the latest coverage as it happens. For all the latest updates and issues arising on the summit, stay tuned to SABC News Channel 404.
Vera Ephraim defied family and traditions to follow her dream.
Decided that I'm going to prove to them that they were wrong.
The first breakthrough came in when she was studying and touring in Europe.
That was my first breakthrough.
Generations was her first television debut in South Africa.
It was my first gig. I was very excited. I was very happy. I said, yeah, this is confirmation I'm at the right place.
After pain, rejection, and suffering, her dream became a reality.
I followed my path, and I'm happy and grateful and blessed.
Join your host, Buleng Mulabati, on Bupilong every Friday at 17:30.
Health Talk, your show on health practice.
The people being empowered with knowledge so that they can change their behavior and reduce their risk of being sick.
How serious is stress at work?
If we don't address workplace stress, that negative stress, then it can lead to burnout and it can lead to depression.
How does absentees affect companies?
The one that's really problematic for employers is the one that is unscheduled.
How can companies organize their wellness program?
Health promotion mustn't just be a one-size-fits-all type of approach. It must be customized based on understanding of the unique needs of that particular organization.
For health tips that will help you to adopt healthy living with Dr. Sillo Mutawung on Health Talk every Saturday.
Get all the latest news from the SABC's online news services on our website. Breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
It's 1100 hours Central African time on this Thursday, the 28th of January 2016. This is Newsroom on SABC News, Channel 404. A warm welcome to the final hour. I'm Elvis Preston. I'll be with you until 12 o'clock, and you have to stay with us as we broadcast live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg, South Africa, to the rest of the African continent. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Today we're asking you the question, based on the African Union and the summit taking place, is peace in Africa a reality? That's our question to you. Let us know what's on your mind on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom, as well as on the Facebook page. But first, let's take a look at your headlines. The Reserve Bank is expected to announce another interest rate hike this afternoon following the first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. President Jacob Zuma says the controversial pension tax laws will only be reviewed after 2 years as labor unions threaten to strike over the issue. And the situation remains tense at Cape St. Francis in the Eastern Cape as sporadic veld fires continues to flare up. Now, those are all your headlines, but first, let's find out from Kendall Monkamate what's happening on the sports front. Very good morning.
Good morning, Elvis. Thank you very much. And a hearty good morning to everybody at home as well. It's all about tennis today as the business end of the Australian Open comes to all of us. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
She does it in style.
Serena Williams destroys Polish fourth seed Agnieszka Radwanska 6-love, 6-4 to book a spot in the Australian Open final, where she'll be meeting German Angelique Kerber. Springbok great and captain at the last World Cup, Fourie du Preez may be making a quiet exit from all rugby, as he's currently out of contract with both Sarin and his Japanese club, Suntory. As the Russian Prosecutor General's office is ready to clean up corruption in their country's athletics as it reviews WADA's report. As you can see, we've got quite a lot for you in the sports, as well as Lucas Sitole winning the quad wheelchair championship at the Australian Open. Big show you back around for that at 11:30. Back to you, Elvis.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. The Reserve Bank is expected to announce another interest rate hike this afternoon, following its first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. The statement is expected to paint a bleak picture about the local economic outlook. Economists say the bank is likely to make further large downward adjustments to its GDP growth estimates. The committee is set to reflect on the worsening inflation outlook driven largely by drought, a weaker rand and higher electricity prices. Most economists expect the bank to raise policy rates by 50 basis points. The African National Congress says it is determined to protect the country from experiencing any further economic downgrades. The ruling party expressed confidence in South Africa's global competitiveness after rising from 56 to 49. Its three-day NEC Lekgotla ended in Tshwane last night. The summit of the ANC's decision-making body dealt with urgent priorities facing the government. The topical issue of racism was also on the agenda. However, the Lekgotla mainly focused on economic issues. It issued a stern warning to the United States on AGOA, saying that South Africa will not be dictated to by Washington on matters unrelated to trade relations. The ANC recommitted itself to invest more in infrastructure and social investment. On the upcoming local government elections, the party says it is confident that it will do well. It aims to win back the city of Cape Town from the DA and retain all the other metros. The presidency says the newly signed pension tax laws will go ahead with a review only in 2 years' time. This comes after outrage from private and public labor unions. The tax laws limit lump sum payments to workers to just a third and forces them to convert the rest into annuities, accessed via a monthly allowance. President Jacob Zuma says that complaints by unions that there was never extensive consultation on the tax administration laws are incorrect and misleading. He says there was a total of 40 meetings with NEDLAC and labour unions between 2012 and last year. He says there was also a public comment period, and those comments were considered when the law was finalised. Zuma adds that Parliament required that the law, which comes into play on March the 1st, be reviewed in 2 years. This is despite the Labour Federation COSATU and the Metal Workers Union NUMSA threatening massive strike action if the laws are not repealed. At least 3 houses have been damaged and a number of other fishermen boats completely destroyed in yet another flare-up of bushfires in the Eastern Cape in the resort town of Cape St. Francis. Since the weekend, fire breakouts have had community members in a panic.
From firefighters to sea rescue teams and volunteers, all have been battling with sporadic fire outbreaks since the weekend. Last night, the raging fire came very close to the township area and the airfields. At least 3 houses have been damaged and a number of fishermen boats completely destroyed. As a safety measure, the elderly and families with young children were evacuated. Some residents chose to safeguard their homes and monitor the situation. The community has also taken to social media asking for donations to keep firefighters fueled up with food. They also did some fundraising to bring in a second privately owned helicopter to keep the blazes under control. 3 teams of 20 have been dispatched throughout the area to monitor the situation throughout the night. Concerns remain over strong winds, which could flare up the fires again.
We've put out all blazes, all flares, so we hope that there will be no flares coming up. But with the westerly wind that is coming up in the early mornings of tomorrow morning, starting on very slow pace and running up until 45 degrees or 45 speed limit, so we've put a plan in place.
Police are still investigating the cause of the fire. Reporting SABC News, Cape St. Francis.
Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo will today become the first former head of state to stand trial in the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Gbagbo is charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity following the 2010 elections in the West African country. He will be the first former head of state to see his case at the International Criminal Court go to trial. He is accused of orchestrating the post-election violence in Abidjan in November 2010, following his election defeat to bitter rival Alassane Ouattara. 3,000 people were killed in the unrest. Laurent Gbagbo has been in ICC custody since the end of 2011. He'll be standing trial with his former ally, Blair Gaudet. The pair face 4 counts of crimes against humanity, including murder, rape, and persecution. Gaudet's lawyer said that he will plead not guilty. 1,500 of Gbagbo's supporters are expected to protest outside the International Criminal Court as the trial begins. Typhoid has occurred in the Western Cape. That's days after 7 cases were reported here in Gauteng, one of them fatal. Health authorities say every year cases are identified, with the majority of them having travelled to Zimbabwe or other countries such as India. In the Western Cape, 2 young girls and an adult male are being treated in hospital for typhoid fever. Spokesperson for the Provincial Health Department, Mark van der Heever, says a 9- and 10-year-old girl from Cape Town and a 52-year-old man from the Winelands district have contracted the disease. Gauteng health authorities have reported 7 recent cases of typhoid in that province, with 1 death. African leaders have begun taking a hard look at the challenges facing the continent, and the situation is not a particularly pleasing one. Opening the African Union Executive Council of Ministers meeting, the AU chair, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, warned that resolving Africa's challenges is going to take more than just lip service.
We are but 4 years away from our target year to silence the guns. The suffering of women, men and children in the few countries still plagued by conflict and in the regions facing the threats of terrorism and violent extremism. We must not be deterred from our goal of bringing about peace. That the peoples of Mali, South Sudan, Darfur, Libya, Somalia, others can live in peace and harmony and can join the march towards the Africa we want.
Meanwhile, the United States is looking at the African Union summit and what progress the heads of state make this coming weekend over the floundering peace agreement in South Sudan. The U.S. believes that the process is at a crossroads after a panel of experts report that urged the Security Council to institute an arms embargo on the country. The panel argued that both Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, qualified to be sanctioned over atrocities committed under their leadership during the 2-year civil war.
A 22nd of January deadline for the formation of a transitional government has come and gone, as the IGAD-led peace deal's implementation once again hangs in the balance.
The United States has long made clear that we are very much open to considering whatever tools we think would help get things back on track. You know, this was something we said before there was a peace agreement. It is now something we are very committed to in terms of implementation. We have made reference, in prior resolutions to an arms embargo and to the possibility of considering that. And I think it's something, again, that we have to look at alongside designations if it is a means of stabilizing the situation on the ground or getting the implementation of the agreement back on track.
But their openness to an arms embargo has not been shared by all council members, with Russia expressing concerns that its implementation could be one-sided to the detriment of the government.
This is something, again, we'd want to hear out of the African Union summit what progress they have made pushing President Kiir and Riek Machar back into implementation, and then take that into account as we discuss South Sudan here. But I want to underscore, fighting is happening, people are dying, the situation in South Sudan is not stable. And so the stakes, as I think was reflected in the report, could not be higher for the people of South Sudan.
The UN has long held the view that the civil war could have been averted had it not been for the country's leadership sparking a civil war along ethnic dimensions in one of the world's poorest countries. Sherwin Briceby's SABC News, New York.
Back home, newly released statistics show that rhino poaching levels dropped for the first time in a decade in South Africa. South Africa is home to 20,000 rhinos, accounting for 80% of the world's population. The new statistics were released as yet another rhino calf was born, but unfortunately abandoned by its mother in the Western Cape.
At under a month old, this rhino calf represents the future of its species, one where survival is increasingly trumping the odds. The animal was abandoned by its mother at birth, but was rescued by staff at the Aquila Private Game Reserve just outside Cape Town.
The anti-poaching teams, which are situated all in our mountains, we can't see them, but they're there. Our rhinos are under 24-hour surveillance, sent a radio message through to say that they suspected that a rhino was injured in the bush, went out immediately, and they discovered a calf, a rhino calf. Rhinos don't walk immediately, and he was lying on the ground, and they realized that a birth had happened and the mother was not in sight.
The calf is now under 24-hour supervision and lives with his own carer, who sees to its needs and plays the role normally fulfilled by his mother. Mud bath and guided bush walks are now part of the calf's daily routine.
We give him a bottle of 3 liters. It depends if maybe he's more hungry and he takes 4 liters in, and then we take him for a walk for half an hour into the bush. He normally sticks close vicinity by you. He loves his walks. He runs up and down. He's very boisterous, playful. They need to get that exercise because in a natural wild they would tend to walk with the parents.
Plans to integrate the animal back into his family unit have proved to be unsuccessful so far. The parents have shown no interest in accepting him back, but it hasn't dampened the little calf's spirit at all. The young rhino calf is also said to love music, with his favorite tune amply being the theme from the hit movie The Lion King.
What a lovely story that is. Well, we'll take a break right now and we'll be back right after that with Eben and give you your regional news.
Morning Live sets the agenda for the day. We bring you the latest local and international news.
We are on the ball with all your sports activities and results.
We give you the latest business update.
We bring you the latest weather every time.
Watch Morning Live every weekday morning at 6 o'clock, bringing you everything you need to know before you go. Sharp, sharp, tada. A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon only on the SABC News channel.
As African leaders gather for the AU Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, SABC News is on the ground bringing you all the latest coverage as it happens. For all the latest updates and issues arising on the summit, stay tuned to SABC News, Channel 404.
Welcome back. You're still in Newsroom here on SABC News. Time to shift our focus to what's happening in our regions around South Africa now. Farmers, clergy, women's organisations and other relevant stakeholders in the Eastern Cape are convening in Queenstown to pray for rain to break the worsening drought in the province, while the Eastern Cape Department of Agrarian Reform and Rural Development has been actively assisting farmers. Good rain is urgently needed to help protect the province's agricultural industry. Let's cross now to our reporter in Queenstown, Busisiwe Jamsana, for the latest. Very good morning to you, Busisiwe. I understand you have an interview, but just paint the picture for us quickly before you get into it.
A very good morning indeed. Quite a sunny morning here in Queenstown, where scores of religious leaders, the government and farmers are gathered here in this wall behind me to pray for rain. The situation is so severe in the Eastern Cape that it has moved from affecting ordinary residents who have had to stand in long queues to get water from water tanks, but it affects really farmers who have not plowed maize in the past result of drought and the water shortage. Some having even lost their livestock. There are reports that close to 20,000 livestock has been reported dead, including sheep and cattle and goats. But to tell us more, we are joined by the Agriculture MEC Mlibo Qoboshiane. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Just how severe is the situation in the Eastern Cape?
I can confirm that indeed situation is not rosy at all, and that's why we decided as the sector in the province, economic sector of the cabinet, to submit a quick memorandum to the cabinet yesterday so that the Premier can declare this situation as disastrous. And I think we have quantified the cost of this situation. The fountains are drying up, animals are dying, and the long-term effects of this thing means the cost of food and cost of production is going to be a serious matter. We are now going to ensure that the vulnerability of 1.3 million of cattle population, as well as 3 million sheep and 929,000 goats, can be mitigated if we move faster and quicker in provision of feed, in provision of water, in provision of mineral leaks, so that at least there is something that we are doing. Currently, we are cutting water to various areas, to various districts, because the 4 districts that are affected are ones of densely populated in the province of the Eastern Cape. Krisani, where we are to seek for divine inspiration, Joe Gabi next door here, Alfred Nzo, as well as OR Tambo, are hugely populated districts. And if the severity of this situation is taking place there, it therefore means we are heading for a difficult situation ahead of us.
And mentioning Jogabi, that has been struggling as a result of the Orange River going dry, and other regions and municipalities. Has the interventions worked? Has the situation at least bettered than you found it?
Yes, I want also to thank the Minister of Water and Sanitation at national level for authorizing water from Katse Dam so that it can flow down to the Eastern Cape to bring much more relief in towns like Alwal North. And the second thing is that there is now intervention for human consumption, trucks to carry and cut water to villages, as we are doing procuring those services as well, to go and deliver water, rain harvesting water tanks, buying fodder, hay for animals, and ensuring that all our artisans, including engineering division of the department, are throughout the district to ensure that we maintain and repair drilling of the boreholes, maintenance of windmills, so that we can restore and revitalize, including fencing for pastures. This is what we are trying to do, developing camps and also ensuring all our irrigation schemes are going to massify the production of feed for animals.
And what about convincing the Minister of Culture to declare the country as a disastrous area as drought is hitting all provinces across?
The reason why, as Eastern Cape, were to quantify, to make an assessment and to see that from now going forward, the situation is not going to be much more easy for farmers. Definitely sure, in the national coordination, we are going to propose formally as the government of the province to say the situation is precarious, the situation needs straight and immediate intervention. There is no way we can bargain with this situation. Maize is going to be important, cropping is going to be affected, sales are going to rocket up, and that is going to create internal instability within the country. And I think the moment the country can focus in this reality and cross over it, and ensuring that there are also mitigating mechanisms. Farmers are trained, farmers are advised, farmers are educated, communities understand that we need to conserve what we have. We need more, better and improved program management, including the fastest pace by government to procure these goods and services. I think the situation can improve.
And now you're praying for rain.
Today we decided to come as a province and converge in Queenstown, where you can feel the sweltering heat here. Just to say, God, we can do everything, but the powers and divine inspiration will always come from the above. And I believe Christians are here, non-believers are here, because drought is affecting Jews and Gentiles, same together.
Thank you for affording us this opportunity, but because of time, we're going to have to leave it there. That was the MEC for Agriculture in the Eastern Cape, Mlibo Qoboshiane, telling us that they have already submitted documentation to the cabinet to make sure that some areas in the province, which include Jogabi and Christiani, are declared disaster areas. They are also planning on convincing the National Minister of Culture into turning the country as a disaster area, as drought is hard hitting across all provinces. With that, it's back to you in studio.
Yeah, thank you very much to Busisiwe Jemsana there, coming to you live from Queenstown, not Queenstown, rather now. We continue with our regional update. The battle for control of the heart and soul of the Tlokwe local municipality in the northwest is heating up, with by-elections around the corner in the municipality's 7 wards. All political parties are pulling out all the stops to woo voters. The by-elections are scheduled for the 24th of February, following a Constitutional Court ruling that set aside 2013 by-election results. A special council meeting has been convened for tomorrow, where opposition parties are also preparing to push for a vote of no confidence in the mayor and council speaker. But Tlokwe Mayor Khotso Kumalo insists that come Friday, no other matter will be discussed except the agenda points as dictated by the speaker. Now, SABC reporter Kabelo Molope was in Potchefstroom to get an update.
The Constitutional Court of South Africa on the 30th of November 2015 nullified the 2013 by-elections in 7 wards. Consequent to that, the Democratic Alliance then wanted the Speaker to convene a meeting in December so that they could then pass a motion of no confidence on the mayor and the speaker. Unfortunately, the rules of order by this municipality dictate that you can't have a meeting in December, in which the opposition parties have been part of that. Now, after that, they had then wanted to the Court of South Africa, the High Court of South Africa in Pretoria, to force the speaker to convene an urgent meeting on the 26th of January, which is today. Unfortunately, the court had then ruled that the matters that the DA was raising on their application were not very urgent, and consequent to that, the matters were struck off the roll with cost. Now, this has led to a situation where there's been a lot of bickering and political, games played by the opposition parties in terms of trying to push this matter forward. The reality is that the Constitutional Court decision said that we must have by-elections, in which the Independent Electoral Commission had pronounced that the by-elections will be held on the 24th of February. Now, in terms of our own rules of order, the council meeting will take place on the formal proper council will take place on the 23rd of February. However, it needs to be noted that in terms of the Municipal Finance Management Act, we are expected to table the service delivery budget implementation plan, the annual report, and the midterm report. Now, all these are compliance matters that is expected that as a council you must table them. Now, that means that this council would convene a meeting of such nature on the 29th of January, which is this coming Friday. So it is not correct to say that the ruling party, which is the ANC, had refused to hold meetings or a meeting so that the DA can table their matter. It is important to note that the African National Congress, after it has a reduced majority out of 29, it's got now 22 councillors. The DA has got 19, Freedom Fund has got 2, 1 COPE and 1 independent. It is wrong to make an assumption, and this must be noted both in the local municipality and in the national parliament, to make an assumption that the small political parties are actually children of the Democratic Alliance. They are not. We treat them as independent political parties that are registered in a multi-party democracy. So therefore, it's neither nor here that it means that the 23 councillors will necessarily constitute a majority against the African National Congress. We also will be talking to them.
And just in terms of readiness of the by-elections and what really led to these by-elections?
It is important to note that we have all agreed that all political parties must now be ready to contest for the by-elections, which will take place on the 24th of February. And I can indicate to you that the political parties that contest would also know that the African National Congress as a ruling party has had those votes before, and there will be a free and fair contestation, and whoever managed to put the best manifesto, best program, should be able to see that the will of the people must prevail.
And just this debacle within the municipality, is it not necessarily affecting service delivery within the municipality itself?
I must indicate that this matter has created an impression that there's instability in Tlokwe. There's also problems of service delivery. I can state it right here categorically clear that we're one of the best municipalities. We've received almost 75%, 100% of the spending of our municipal infrastructure grant. We collect around about 95.5% of the revenue. We are one of the most financially viable municipalities in the country, and we're doing quite well with providing services like water, sanitation, sewer, waste collection. We are quite good in that. We're spending a lot of infrastructure budget to reverse many years of the legacy created by apartheid discrimination, and we're doing quite well as a municipality.
And just on the issue of merging between the Tlokwa local municipality and the Ventersdorp local municipality, how far is that process? What are the issues? Is it going on okay?
I must indicate that there is also an issue that relates to the proposed merger of Tlokwa and Ventersdorp. The then Minister of COGTA, Minister Pravin Gordhan, had actually submitted a number of proposals to the Municipal Demarcation Board, requesting them to find a way to merge municipalities, some of those that are not doing well, others unable to provide services, others being unable to collect revenue. Now, Ventersdorp and Potchefstroom, they've got quite a very close relationship in terms of both the community, the culture, and a lot of the Ventersdorp community spend a lot of their money on the retail stores, furniture stores, everything, banking, and many, such that the proposal to bring them together will create quite a very strong, powerful municipality, one revenue base, one tax base, economic development, a larger population, and better services. We believe that it will be to the benefit of the especially people of Ventersdorp, also people of Potchefstroom to benefit out of agriculture, out of many of these things, and we believe that these things are quite good.
Thank you for having us in your office. That was the Mayor of the City of Expertise in the Tlokwa local municipality, Rakhotso Khumalo. Back to studio.
Yeah, thanks you too, Kabelo Molope there. That wraps up our look at regional news here on the Newsroom show. After a short little break, Kendall Mahamate will give us his final sports update of the morning. Don't go away.
Children's rights and health are a priority in the journey of good health.
All children should have access to adequate health care, not only curative but preventative as well.
How to identify ADHD on children.
ADHD is a childhood disorder which manifests with the symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and/or inattention.
Is breastfeeding still a vital nutrition to babies even today?
Breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life is absolutely crucial.
Catch Health Talk with Dr. Sello Mutawun every Saturday from 9 till 10 a.m.
Welcome back. I'm Kendall Makhamate, and I've got your sports, as well as good news. A South African has won the title at the year's first Grand Slam tennis tournament of the year. Top seeds Lucas Sitola and his American partner David Wagner have won the quad wheelchair doubles final in straight sets at the Australian Open in Melbourne. Meanwhile, top-seeded American Serena Williams will face 7th-seeded Angelique Kerber of Germany in the women's final on Saturday. Williams crushed 4th-seed Agnieszka Radwanska of Poland, while Kerber beat Johanna Konta of Britain in straight sets.
The first set was one-way traffic as Williams overpowered Radwanska from the get-go. The Pole, who was on a 13-match winning streak, failed to win a game as Williams quickly clinched at 6-love in just 21 minutes. In the second, Radwanska seemed to lift her game. Despite trailing 1-3, she broke back and levelled matters at 3-all. But, as usual, the American did not take long before she was in the lead again. She broke the Radwanska serve in the 9th game and held her own to bag the set 6-4 and reach her 7th final at the Australian Open.
I'm honestly a little surprised. I feel like, I was just, I took so much time off trying to prepare for this, and Now I'm in the final. So whatever happens, I'm very excited to be coming out and playing in yet another final. And, you know, it's just going to be great no matter what.
In contrast to the first semi-final, the opening set between Kerber and Konta was a much more balanced affair. Kerber, however, made the most of her experience to win it 7-5. The German then steamrolled over her opponent in the second. She clinched it 6-2 to advance to her first ever Grand Slam final, where Williams awaits.
It's just amazing to play against number one in the first Grand Slam of the year, and I'm really looking forward to take this challenge. I mean, of course, I must play my best tennis to have a chance against her, but actually I will try to give everything. I have nothing to lose on Saturday.
The women's final is scheduled to get underway at 10:30 in the morning. Liesel Zankel, SABC News.
And news that we headlined with this morning is news coming out of Japan is that Springbok great Furido Priya may have played his last competitive match over the weekend when his side Santori-san Goliath beat Toyota Shoki Shuttles 78-14 in Osaka. Du Preez captained the Springboks in their last two matches at last year's Rugby World Cup in England. He famously scored the winning try against the spirited Wales in the quarter-final of the tournament, earning the team a semi-final berth against eventual champions New Zealand. Du Preez, who's a darling for the Bulls faithful, played 76 tests for the Springboks since making his debut in 2004. He's also been a pivotal player for Santori, having joined them in 2011. Now, Saru has confirmed that Du Preez is not contracted to South African Rugby, nor any South African franchise. Now, Netball South Africa has made huge strides recently, solidifying the world ranking as tops on the continent and 5th in the world. We caught up with the president of Netball SA, Mimi Mthethwa, and asked her first about the sponsorships they'd managed to retain and grow.
That this year we are going to be seeing more of SPA's involvement in our Brutal Fruit Netball Premier League, and that shows that they will always be behind us, and we are very thankful to the whole group, especially to Mike Prentice, who is the current MD.
You been coach Norma Plummer on board. You had a very successful World Cup last year. What happens now? Is she still involved?
The involvement of Norma Plummer showed us that if you are a coach and you trust all the players that have been given to you, because when we go for selections, we don't just select 7 best players and 5 extra players, but we select 12 players that to us are capable of taking court and really showing that they are good athletes. So yes, Norma Plummer is going to be involved with us again. We are waiting for her to come back in February, where she is going to be working with all our coaches. We want her to really work closely with the coaches, not because we doubt the ability and experience that our coaches have, but from what she has done with the players and from what we hear from the players themselves, we know that we've got to keep, abreast with all the developments and new things that come about in coaching. So she is the person to give us that.
This is going on. The Russian Prosecutor General's office is reviewing a report by the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, which exposed widespread cheating and corruption in Russian athletics and led to Russia's indefinite ban from all competition. Russia's Sports Minister Vitaly Mutko announced that the Prosecutor General's office was willing to initiate criminal proceedings where necessary. WADA's report alleged widespread corruption and collusion that added up to a state-sponsored drugs culture in a sporting superpower. The Commission found a deeply rooted culture of cheating in Russian athletics, which it said Russian state security services colluded with, and also identified what it called systemic failures in the global governing body, the IAAF. The Commission also claimed that the WADA-accredited anti-doping laboratory in Moscow destroyed over 1,400 samples shortly before an inspection. The IAAF suspended the Russian Athletics Federation in mid-November last year following these allegations, despite both the country's athletes and sports minister denying involvement in or knowledge of doping. After the ban, Russia announced a 3-month roadmap to clean up its act, with the nation's Olympic Committee leading efforts to ensure honest athletes can compete at Rio 2016. Now, South Africa's under-19 cricket team's defence of their World Cup title got off to a disastrous start. They lost their opening encounter against host Bangladesh by 43 runs.
The Bangladeshis won the toss and chose to bat first in the opening match of the tournament. On a relatively docile surface, there were helpful contributions from most of Bangladesh's batsmen up front, especially the 59-run fourth-wicket partnership between Joyaz Sheikh and the captain Mehedi Hassan Miraz. But Nazimul Shanto was the top scorer for the home side. His 73 helped to lift their total to a low but defendable 240 for 7. Vian Mulder was the pick of the bowlers for the tourists. The seamer claimed 3 wickets for just 42 runs. South Africa didn't make the best of starts in their reply. They lost most of their top order batsmen too early in their innings, and that seemed to set the tone for the visitors' chase. Apart from opener Liam Smith, none of the other batsmen managed to trouble the bowlers or hardly even get into double figures. Smith battled to a century, but was quickly running out of batting partners at the other end.
And 100 for Liam Smith. And he's overjoyed, should be.
And when he was dismissed for 100, the writing was pretty much on the wall for the tourists. They were eventually bundled out for 197, losing by 43 runs. Their next match is against Namibia on Sunday. Samantha Mari, SABC News.
Well, let's hope that the young boys' fortunes increase and improve as the tournament goes on. That's why we leave it with the sports. I'll hand over now to Eben Janssen, who's standing by.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kendall. Of course, our focus today is the African Union Summit. Now, for Agenda 2063, to be successful, the African Union must ensure that member countries have the capacity and skills to embark on this new path. The AU has established the African Capacity Building Foundation that supports capacity building initiatives across the continent. Now, foreign editor Sophie Mukwena spoke to the Executive Secretary of the Foundation, Professor Emmanuel Nandozi. She began by asking him about the role the foundation has in helping the AU.
Types of roles that we play. The first is to provide funding for building the capacity of the African Union and member states. And so we have a grant program that provides funding for both the public sector, the private sector, and civil society organizations, and also to the continental organizations like the AU, so that they can strengthen their internal processes, they can get the kind of human capacity they need in order to design and implement the right policies for Africa and take the agenda of development forward. The second thing that we do is to provide knowledge products, do research on capacity development, and share best practices and lessons that anybody can benefit from, whether they are in a civil society organization or a country trying to manage its natural resources better, or a country that is trying to enhance the educational system and so on and so forth. And the third thing that we do is actually to provide some what we call capacity building services or capacity development services. And these services are based upon our 25 years of experience in this business. So we know what works and what doesn't work. We know, for example, how to make an organization to become more effective. If an organization is supposed to be producing at a certain level and it is not performing at that level, we can come and do a needs assessment to understand where the problems are. Are there organizational problems? Are there in terms of the skills that people have? Is it because of the systems that are in place, or even the structure that they have? So once we do this kind of analysis, we can then help to change some of these things and provide the kind of services that are needed to enhance the performance of the organization.
Since you have established this relationship with the AU, in terms of the successes, can you briefly tell us what have you achieved thus far?
Well, we have helped the African Union to have a robust monitoring and evaluation department. That's one concrete example. Because as you know, it is one thing to say that you are implementing a development agenda, or that you've designed good policies and strategies, but it's another thing to implement it. But it's even more important for you to measure to what extent you're achieving your goals and whether you're making an impact on the ground. So this was an issue that the AU Commission was battling with, because there was no way that they can show clearly that they were actually successful on the ground in achieving what they want to achieve. And so we have helped them to really design, to strengthen their, in terms of human capacity, their monitoring and evaluation system. We help them to develop monitoring and evaluation frameworks and to design those things and start to roll it out and to implement. So that's one concrete example of something that we have done. The second thing that we have done, again, is to really go and do a very comprehensive analysis of the capacity that you need to be able to achieve Agenda 2063. And that, to us, is very important. Madam Zuma has shown a lot of leadership here in, requesting me as the head of the premier capacity building organization in the continent to really come and assist in doing this assessment. What are the capacity needs? If you want to really, the Africa you want in 50 years, do you have the capacity to actually achieve it? If so, if not, what kind of capacities do you need? And so we have done this. They've also asked us to look at the critical skills that are needed to achieve the first 10-year plan. And we have also done this. And then we also have put together some kind of capacity development strategy to achieve our goals.
But looking at the whole work that you are doing, to raise funds, it's not an easy thing, particularly when you look at the economic challenges the whole world is facing currently. How do you ensure that you always have those resources that you help the AU with?
You see, this is a very important question. Because our organization, just like any other organization that relies on mobilizing resources to be able to do its work, when there is economic downturn, as you have global economic downturn now, and many African countries, especially those that have natural resources, mineral resources, the prices have collapsed in many instances, and so the countries are having difficulty balancing their books or implementing their own development projects. But one good thing is that African countries have seen the value of this organization because it's helping them in tangible ways in building the capacity of their ministries, their central banks, and their institutions. So they have really stepped up, in spite of all these challenges, to make their contributions. But at the same time, we have a diversified sources of funding. Some of them come from the African countries. Some of them come from the multilateral organizations like the World Bank and the African Development Bank and all the other international organizations. And some of them come from the partners, from the developed countries. So this sort of helps us to maintain a balance in spite of the global challenges. But it is difficult. And now that we're able to provide some services, we're also being able to realize some revenue from that as well that will help us to work.
You spoke about the multilateral organizations such as the World Bank and the IMF.
Yes.
As Africans, at times we are very skeptic in terms of them funding us because of the fact that at times they will dictate the policies. How do you ensure that we strike a balance in maintaining the autonomy and independence of member countries in terms of their economic policies, but also meet the requirements of such institutions?
Well, because ACBF is owned by the African countries. We have about 39 member countries right now, but we do operate everywhere in the continent. And these countries, their finance ministers and their planning ministers constitute our board of governors. So they set the agenda for us overall, where they think we should be going in a broad sense. And this is what we discuss with the multilaterals. So it is not the multilaterals who tell us where we should focus. It is African governments that tell us where we should be heading, and then we discuss with multilaterals to get their funding. Usually there seem to be some sort of coincidence of interest in this regard. They may want to put emphasis in some places, but by and large they don't generally come to micromanage and tell us what we should be focusing on or what we should not be focusing on. For example, somebody can say, we would like for you to pay attention to women. I think that's a major priority for the continent as well. So there is that issue, and since they are not the ones that would tell ACBF how we go about doing it, then we have complete autonomy on that. And but I must say that in the 25 years of existence of ACBF, the sort of funding it has received from the multilaterals are funding that are just basically based upon what we define as the areas we want to focus upon.
And finally, the issue of corruption is rife in the continent or across the world. How do you ensure that the resource that you give to whoever you give the resource to are put to good use?
Yes, we have a very robust mechanism of financial supervision. which is based on international standards. In fact, that's one of the things that ACBF can bring to support any project that we fund. We don't only fund you, but we also help you to introduce mechanisms for financial controls to ensure that money is used as it is. So we have, we have a cycle of processes that we go through from when there's a request for support through the appraisal of whether this is something that we should support or not, and to look at existing mechanisms. Are they do they inspire confidence or not? And we get commitments from governments to ensure that they are not going to interfere one way or the other. But we have real experts whose job it is to monitor the use of the funds. And they do the project supervision and monitoring evaluation. And then we require an audit all the time, periodic audit of the projects. This is how we ensure that our rate of misuse of fund is so very, very minimal indeed. And because we just don't give somebody the entire money, if we say we have a $5 million project in country A in one project, we're not going to give you $5 million on the spot, because our projects are usually multi-year projects. And this is one of why we are successful in building sustainable capacity. It's not, we don't just come there and do one training or one workshop and walk away. No, we establish the mechanism or the institution to do that. And for 5 years or so, we just be funding you based upon how you're performing and how you're doing. So that way we ensure that there is a minimum corruption or misuse of funds.
Yeah, that was our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, speaking to the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, Professor Emmanuel Nandozi in Ethiopia. That's where we wrap today's Newsroom show, Elvis.
Thank you. Well, we asked you a question, but we didn't get that much responses. But it's a very important question. How do we ensure that we have peace and security on the African continent? And not just that, also economic prosperity. That's something that we need to add next time. But that's where we got to leave it. From myself, Elvis Preslin.
Myself, goodbye.
And me, Kendall Mankamat, in case you'd forgotten.
Ciao for now.
Legamos. Legamos. Legamos.